32. Where does love go? One morning in 1974, Elvis woke from a deep, placid ill sleep and groggily struggled to focus on the face of the woman beside him. Linda was exhausted, having survived one of the most frightening nights of her life. It started out like any other. Elvis was eating some chicken soup for dinner, and Linda went into the bathroom to get ready for bed. She took her time cleansing her face and changing into her nightclothes, and when she came out, she saw a terrifying scene. Elvis was face down in the hot soup, suffocating in the bowl. She yanked him out and tried to revive him, and when that failed, she frantically called Dr. Nick, who raced in and gave Elvis a shot of Ritalin. Now, after sleep, it took him an unbearably long time to get out what he wanted to say.
"Mommy," he said.
"Yes, honey."
I had a dream last night,"
he muttered. "What did you dream?" Linda asked.
"I dreamed that you were my twin, and I came out first and you smothered."
His voice was weighty, glue-like, his pauses interminable.
"You let me be born, but in the process you died saving me."
A chill ran over her. She tried to tell him that he'd had a problem breathing, and she'd had Dr. Nick come in and give him a shot. But no, he didn't want to talk about that. She was his twin. She'd saved his life. "Well, it was just a dream, honey," she said. And then he fell back asleep. Dr. Nick says he had not realized that Elvis was a hard addict until the Demerol incident. He got on the phone to the doctor in California, who administered it, and angrily told him Elvis was a very sick man, that he was filled with fluid and that his condition was grave. His patient had an extreme reaction to the Demerol, Dr. Nick said, and asked if the California practitioner was also giving him steroids, as Elvis was now cushion-goyed. "Well, yes," crackled the voice from the West Coast. He'd mixed some cortisone with a Novocaine to help with the healing. That might have aggravated Elvis's glaucoma, Dr. Nick thought. Now the physician consulted with Doctors David Knott and Robert Fink, addiction specialists who worked with alcohol and drug rehab patients. They recommended Dr. Nick immediately put Elvis on phenobarbital to help with withdrawal symptoms, and then after dropping by the hospital to evaluate Elvis themselves, they suggested Dr. Nick start him on methadone, a treatment normally associated with heroin addiction. The next step was to call Dr. Larry Rubel, a gastroenterologist, who ordered x-rays and found that Elvis had a bowel ileus, or enlargement of the intestine, and that it was packed full of fecal material, a common side effect of long-term opiate abuse. "He would be so distended," says Dr. Nick, "that a lot of his potbelly was just his enlarged colon and his inability to get it to function." Elvis also had degenerative arthritis in his neck and lower back, so Dr. Nick asked him to cut certain songs and gyrations out of his show. A larger problem was what his liver biopsy showed. Testing found damage consistent with toxicity, and the organ contained a great many fatty cells, a condition likely brought on by both his eating habits and medication abuse. He had a diabetic tendency, but his diabetes was not so advanced that he needed to be treated with insulin. Linda slept on a cot beside him for the first few nights, and Elvis would lower his bed so they could be as close as possible. Then the staff brought in a hospital bed just for her. Since Elvis had to wear a gown, he wanted Linda to wear one too, so they'd look like patients together. They watched a lot of television, especially game shows, and at night, after the Memphis television station signed off, Linda remembers, "We used to just sit and watch the little Indian head, bzzz, just because there was a picture on television. And they'd listen to High Flight, the pilot's creed that came on about 1 a.m. and served as another end-of-programming signal. Then they found they could see the closed-circuit images from the nursery and look at babies all night long. They came to recognize a few of them as time went on. One baby seemed to be waving at them, and Linda later sent him shoes. And the nurses would tape signs that said, hi Elvis to the cribs and incubators, or come up to the cameras and smile. They got excited when they saw a newborn. Elvis just loved babies and children, and he would become very tender and like a little baby himself and regress back into that infantile state, and I'd have to baby him a little. Sometimes we were like two little babies together. Occasionally, he'd be the baby, and I'd want to be the baby too, so it would be like, wait a minute, I want to be the baby, and I want you to be the adult. We can't both be babies right now. We'd get into a silly thing, but it worked for us. It was fine. They fantasized about having a child together, and Elvis wanted a son. They talked about everything from the way he would look to what his name would be. Elvis had always liked John Baron Presley, and even our pet names for him, and then we would pretend that he was out somewhere and we were looking for him. We just had funny games going. But Elvis would also talk to Linda about his hang-up, telling her, the whole notion of a baby passing through there just made it an unsavory place to be. She found it very odd. It didn't make me anxious to have his child. When Elvis got out of the hospital, Doctors Knott and Fink went to Graceland a couple of times, where Dr. Nick and Joe had already been to search Elvis's bedroom and to throw out large bottles of pills, including Dexedrine and Seconal. But Elvis refused to get into anything deep with the physicians, who had hoped to persuade him to enter Dr. Knott's drug treatment program. As soon as they started talking about iatrogenic and volitional polypharmacy, and he found out precisely what kind of doctors they were, he turned them away. Says Dr. Nick, he didn't want anybody getting into his brain. Even after Elvis stabilized, his recovery was slow, but little by little he felt better. Dr. Nick dropped by every night after work, and they felt like a team. Elvis, Dr. Nick, and Linda, working to restore him to health. One problem at home was getting him to bathe on a regular basis. Left on his own, he would just eat the dark green Nolo tablets that Linda used to keep down menstrual odor. Though recommended for problems with bowel control and colostomy, Elvis thought they'd kill any type of body odor, from bad breath to butt, even underarm. Remembers Billy Smith? He ordered bottles of them. As time went on, that was his bath. When he went to Vegas on January 26, 1974, the Las Vegas Sun reported that he was back at the top of his form, in good humor, extremely generous time-wise, and a jam-packed Hilton main showroom responded warmly. But at Dr. Nick's suggestion, the engagement was cut from 4 weeks to 2, with 1 show on the weeknights and 2 on the weekends. Because the more shows he did, the more medications he needed. And I tried to get Dr. Ghanem out of it, because the medications that were giving Elvis the most trouble were the ones he was prescribing him. The Colonel didn't like the idea. Fewer shows meant less money, and he particularly didn't like Dr. Nick telling anybody what to do. Parker was much more comfortable around Dr. Ghanem, with whom he shared a lot of friends. Ghanem was deeply connected to the mob. Dr. Nick would later lose his license for overprescribing to a number of patients over a period of years. But Dr. Ghanem was just as loose with a prescription pad, and the general feeling among the guys was that he never really tried to help Elvis. Kathy Westmoreland saw it too. When Dr. Ghanem was there, Elvis was worse. When Nick was there, everything was in more control. Besides, Kathy thought, there was something unsettling about Dr. Ghanem. I think he had an Elvis complex. He thought he was Elvis in a way. He dressed like him a couple of times, put on his jumpsuits, and had his dark hair. He'd come into the dressing room like that, and Elvis didn't really laugh that much. I don't think he thought it was that amusing. But Elvis was not acting like a man who had kicked a drug habit. He was becoming more peculiar, erratic, and dangerous, and he was not as patient with the fans as he had been at previous engagements. When one girl tried to yank off his necklace as a souvenir, he snarled his worst epithet at her. "You son of a bitch." At another show, he kicked a fan who got too close. He had a new bass player now, 30-year-old Duke Bardwell, who replaced Emery Gordy Jr. at the last minute. Duke, a Louisiana native who grew up loving Elvis, was nervous as a chicken in a yard full of roosters about the idea of playing with his hero. But on the day Elvis auditioned him, at the RCA studios in Los Angeles early in January 1974, Duke had another reason to be uneasy. They'd run through the songs for about an hour or so, and then during the break, Duke found himself standing next to Elvis. He'd noticed the big nickel-plated pistol that Elvis pulled out of his belt and handed to one of the guys. "I know you have a lot of martial arts training," Duke ventured, trying to break the ice. "So I was wondering why you carry a gun." Elvis put his top lip up a little and answered, "That's to handle anything from 6 feet out. 6 feet in, I got it covered." Duke was thinking about that as Elvis turned to walk away. Then suddenly he spun around and threw a punch that stopped with one of his big rings resting on the end of Duke's nose. I never saw it coming, but it left me with a red face and a racing heart. He could have missed by a half-inch and driven my nose bone through my brain. Elvis's behavior grew even more unpredictable once he got to Vegas. One night, he shot out a chandelier in the suite, and another night he fired randomly when he couldn't find Dr. Ghanem. Already, he had narrowly missed hitting Linda while trying to pick off a porcelain owl with a .22 caliber Savage revolver. She had been in the bathroom, and remarkably, though shaken, kept her wits about her as the bullet tore through the wall, nicked the toilet paper holder, and shattered a hanging mirror. It was crazy, but he didn't take it as casually as some people said he did. He was just having a little target practice, but he was really upset. The Colonel had invited Bob Finkel, the executive producer of the '68 special, to attend Elvis's show one night, and afterward, Joe took Bob and his wife, Jane, up the private elevator to the penthouse and left them alone to go in by themselves. When Bob opened the door, he was startled to find that the suite was pitch black, except for the light from the television set. There was a Western on, and Elvis was sitting there. After all we went through together, all he said was, "Hi, Bob," and then he fired at the television with a pistol. He was killing the bad guys, I guess, but it scared the shit out of me. Jane and I got right back in the elevator and went down. The shooting of television started one afternoon at Graceland, when Elvis was eating breakfast, and the polished face of actor-singer Robert Goulet suddenly filled the TV screen. It took him back to the memory of Anita Woods going on tour with Goulet when Elvis was away in Germany. She was writing him a letter one day when Goulet stopped and scribbled a postscript, something to the effect of, "Hey, Elvis, don't worry, I'm taking pretty good care of Anita." It was just a joke, but it always gnawed at him, and he had been thinking more about Anita lately. In what would be their last conversation, she called him in Vegas to tell him her father had died, and to say that for the first time she understood how sad it was for him when his mother passed away. Now, seeing Goulet just brought it all back, and Elvis flashed in anger, pulled out his .22, and blew a hole through the set. Then, as Marty Lacker tells it, he calmly picked up his utensils and said, "That'll be enough of that shit." Elvis's reliance on pills tended to be worse in Vegas than anywhere else, because the playground of his 20s had become the trap of his 30s. Vegas is a terrible place, and he chose to get wasted rather than have to deal with it. "It's better to be unconscious than miserable," he'd offer with a tinge of black humor. If we were at home, Linda says, he could just sleep for days and it didn't matter. But in Vegas, he had to get up again for the shows, so it was a continuous cycle of uppers and downers. They shot him to go to sleep, then they'd have to shoot him to wake him up, Jackie Kahane said. "I saw him wiped out. I mean, crawling on the bloody floor. It was very sad. Very, very sad." There were a good 5 or 6 times that he got so fucked up that he almost died, Lamar remembers. Usually it was from the sleeping pills. Then he had the opposite problem at a Howard Johnson motel somewhere on the road. He was so wired that Nick had to go in through his neck and shoot him to knock him out. In Lamar's view, if it hadn't been for Linda and the group, Elvis would have died 3 years earlier. He constantly had to be rescued from choking on his food. Drugs numb the nerves in the throat that control the swallowing reflex. And one time Linda rushed to call Joe when Elvis turned blue with a peach pit stuck in his throat. Being with him was like being in a firehouse, Lamar says. You never knew when the alarm was going to go off. During that Vegas engagement, Elvis became better acquainted with 23-year-old Ann Pennington, a model actress and future Playboy playmate who lived in L.A. Her older sister, Janice, was one of the girls on The Price is Right, a game show that Elvis often watched with Linda in the hospital. He'd met both of the Penningtons earlier that fall at the Hillcrest house. They shared the same Beverly Hills dentist, Mac Shapiro, who telephoned Anne and said Elvis was going through a rough patch after his divorce and needed to meet some nice girls. Would they see him? Anne was more of a Beatles fan and begged off, but Janice had always liked his music, and though engaged, went to the house one evening. The next day, she called her sister and said Anne had to meet him, that Elvis was the most amazing, kind, sweet Southern gentleman. When Anne finally went over, Jo opened the door and she saw Elvis sitting directly in front of her on the couch in a green leisure suit. He looked and he got up, and all of a sudden I went, "Oh, geez, wow." He was just charming and lovely, and we had a great time. The beautiful blonde had a 3-year-old daughter, Jessica, but Elvis was already interested in her by the time he found out she was a mother. When he did, he was like, "Oh my God," and he told me about his block. The first time he heard her call her daughter Jessie, he said, "That's my twin's name." Soon he was comfortable enough with the situation that they bathed Jessie and Lisa together in the tub, and he played with Anne's daughter and spoiled her with candy just the way he did his own child. Then, when they finally got around to intimacy, and he saw that Annie Pie, as he affectionately nicknamed her, still excited him, he was able to push his phobia from his mind. From the beginning, he found the soulful Anne, with her big, expressive eyes, easy to be around, and he could level with her. "I'm so lonely, Annie," he would say, and sit on the bed and play Blue Spanish Eyes for her on his guitar. She knew about loneliness. She'd recently moved to L.A. from San Diego and didn't know many people other than her sister, and so she was eager to listen to all his old escapades, brag on his karate technique, and appreciate the Charles Boyer album he was currently obsessed with, particularly the Frenchman's heavily accented recitation of "Where Does Love Go When It Leaves the Heart?" It was a question he asked himself over and over. When Anita called to let him know about her father's death, he talked so slow and draggy and not like his effervescent self, the way I remembered him. But he said, "Little, get a pen and paper. I want you to write this poem down, verbatim. Take a deep breath." She did what he said, right down to the inhale. "Now read it back to me, Little," he said. "Don't ever forget it." There, with Anne, he did virtually the same thing. "Listen to this, Annie Pie," he'd say to her. "Aren't these just the most romantic words you've ever heard?" There was an awful lot of feeling there, she says of the relationship. My experience with him was nothing but fun and sweetness. They read his books, and she introduced him to one he loved called Lessons in Truth that her mother had given her when she was a teenager. They just had such great conversations, and while she saw the drug thing on a couple of occasions, it didn't dominate their time together. One night in Vegas, when they were sitting around on bar stools with all the guys, Elvis brought out a joint. It was Anne's first time to smoke grass, and we got laughing, and he said something and he grabbed her, and they fell off the chairs and laughed some more. But another night, he'd had a couple of drinks, which Anne realized was a rarity for him, and she woke up in the middle of the night freezing in her negligee. Suddenly, she realized she was soaked, but she just moved over to the edge of the bed and stayed there. When he got up, he was mortified. He said, "Oh my God, Annie Pie, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you wake me?" Then we were sitting out with the guys and he said, "I peed all over the bed. Do you believe it? Poor thing, she was huddled in a little corner there. She didn't say a word." He didn't seem embarrassed to talk about it, but after the maids came up and carried the mattress out of the suite, nobody said anything else about it. When Linda found out about Anne, she didn't think that he was really with her, but still, I felt it was a violation of our relationship, and certainly something he wouldn't have tolerated. She'd had an inkling he was with other people now and then. Sherry Williams, for example, came along to Palm Springs with the group, and then when Linda was away with a girlfriend, Sherry spent a week at Graceland. I wondered, what's this all about? I didn't realize that Elvis was seeing other women when he was with Linda. But mostly Elvis just wanted company. We did a lot of things: theater, karate, shopping. Basically, I think he wanted someone to stay with him while she was gone. However, it was one of the more intimate times I had with him. Then there was a dalliance with Nanette Cocklish, a broadcast newswoman who went to Vegas on a mission to meet Elvis Presley, and I wasn't going to give up. He came on to her twice, the second time in Linda's presence. She was sitting right next to him. His head was turned in my direction as we were talking, flirting, and laughing. We saw each other a week later at his home in Holmby Hills. Elvis wanted to be happy, Marty saw. He just didn't know how to do it. He felt it was too late for him to find happiness. He could have found it with Linda, but instead of concentrating on that, he looked back at Priscilla and thought, maybe I'm not cut out to be married. For Linda, it was past disillusioning, as the two had been together literally 24 hours a day for the first year that we were together. And within 2 weeks of meeting her, Elvis told her he was in love and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. But as she grew and matured, she also became more aware of her own needs and what Elvis could and could not give her. I think the timing was bad, Linda assesses. Not to take away from the magnitude of it, but I was young and he was just coming out of a marriage. It was a transitional kind of relationship, even though it lasted well beyond the transitional years. We planned to be married, and then the time just kind of passed us. Joe Smith remembers how crazy Elvis had been about Linda. She had a peach-colored outfit, and when she wore it, he would bite at her. He would be talking, and as she passed by, he'd go, and so, nah, 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 like a shark or something. But what started out as marathon lovemaking sessions in Las Vegas dwindled down to once-a-year sex and life-saving heroics. It wasn't so much that he was truly impotent, though there were times when the drugs rendered him so. We discussed sexual things, Dr. Nick reports, and I think more than anything else, he got preoccupied with having more of a mother figure around him to take care of him. I don't think it was because he couldn't perform. I just think that's what he was interested in. And so he continued to hit on other girls right in front of Linda, including 21-year-old Sheila Ryan, who arrived in Vegas at roughly the same time as Ann Pennington. Joe, who thought Sheila was gorgeous and had tried to date her himself as his marriage was ending, brought her backstage in early 1974. Elvis saw her across the room and, trying to figure out an excuse to approach her, threw a grape at her so he could come over and apologize without Linda being suspicious. He hit her right between the eyes, smack in the forehead. I had grape juice running down my face. He flung it from about 15 feet away, and I mean, it was an amazing shot. I thought it had to be a mistake, because nobody would do that. But Joe was laughing, and Elvis was laughing, kneeling down and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," over and over, and Linda was so nervous in her yellow jersey dress that it turned a different color from under her arm down to her waist. When Elvis looked up at her, Sheila finally realized that Elvis had actually thrown the grape on purpose, so she wasn't surprised when Joe was on the phone, having dialed her every few minutes for 2 days while she was changing apartments. "Where in the heck have you been? My boss likes you and wants to see you." She was so angelic-looking, she could have passed for a 14-year-old. And though she'd been on the cover of Playboy magazine just that previous October, she was a virgin, a Catholic girl from the burbs of Chicago, Franklin Park. For some reason she couldn't quite figure out, she had self-esteem issues, as well as what would later be diagnosed as Asperger's syndrome. Men flocked at her feet. She'd left home fleeing from a crazy boyfriend, intending to go to LA. But she got only as far as Las Vegas in her worn-out Volvo and wasn't sure what was next. Sheila was thinking about all that as she rode up the elevator to Elvis's suite between shows. He gave her a hug, and he was dripping wet with sweat, and he had a white towel, and the towel was dripping wet, and he had no qualms about just sweating all over me. Immediately, he made a little dig about the fact that she was wearing slacks, but they were the best things she owned. To Sheila, who would be Elvis's only hippie girlfriend. Slacks meant dressing up. Normally, she wore jeans with holes in them, and now she felt sheepish. "They're Sir for her," she said defensively, meaning they were a good brand. "Why do you dress like a man?" he continued. She looked at his stage outfit, which reminded her of a Dalmatian, and then she gave it right back to him. "Does Cruella know you have her cape tonight?" He let out a hearty laugh. He liked it that she was capable of such quick and funny repartee, and he admired her spunk. But she could see he was even more nervous than she was, and that a girl in a pair of slacks, with her hair stuck flat to her head, wasn't going to do it for him. Still, she got in a snit when he ordered her to put on some eyeliner, and when he said, "Your bathroom is over there," she thought, "Oh, it's my bathroom, is it?" She was just a little bit miffed, but in a fun sort of way, and as she made her beeline, she flipped him off, but in the front so he couldn't see. "And don't sass me either," he called out. Sheila shook her head. How did he do that? In the bathroom, she rummaged around and did the best she could with the little makeup she had in her bag, and when she reappeared, he stunned her. "Do you believe in love at first sight?" he asked. Sheila was certainly attracted to him, but she didn't know whether it was love, and she wouldn't decide for 7 months. She would be his last significant girlfriend, but at that point, all she knew for certain was that Elvis had made it clear how he felt, and that once you are on the other side of that black velvet curtain, life is never the same. They ate dinner in the bedroom after the second show, and then he moved near the platform bed and sat cross-legged on the floor. People always threw all kinds of odd things on the stage to him, and this night he brought back a baby's bib, a plastic fireman's hat, and a necklace with a cross on it made of gold twigs, with the initials EP and a star set into the bars of the cross. Since he hated being called the king, he gave her the necklace. Then he put on the fireman's hat and asked Sheila to tie the bib around his neck. To her astonishment, he began to speak in a tiny voice. "I'm Elvis. I'm Elvis Presley. I'm a baby. This is my bib. Sit here by me." She could tell that he wasn't just goofing around, that he really wanted to be a baby, and he wanted his mother. I thought, oh boy, we have problems here, and I knew I had to make a decision right then and there. She thought for a minute, can I do this? And the answer was, damn right I can. They spent most of the night together, and while it never got anything close to being sexual, it was romantic. He sang to her on the balcony, and he was very kissy. Very, very kissy, she thought. And they had a lot of fun just rolling around with their clothes on. Later, she was relieved he wasn't the sort of cuddler you have to push off of you all night long. She let him fall asleep, and then around 5 a.m. she got up and went back to her apartment. 6 hours later, Joe was on the phone. "God damn it, where are you? The boss is furious." She realized then that she was expected to stay the night, and when she got back to the hotel, she assumed Elvis would be thrilled to see her. Instead, he was mad. He was sitting at the breakfast table and his leg was doing a St. Vitus's dance. He said nothing, and I was perplexed. He said, "Follow me," and I did, like a little geisha. We went in the next room, and he pulled out a hypodermic needle, filled it with Demerol, flicked it 3 times so there were no air bubbles in it, and handed it to me. Then he put his thumb into the elastic waistband of his pajamas and pulled it down just far enough. "Have you ever done this before?" "Uh-huh." She'd been a nurse's aide, so she wasn't unfamiliar, and she gave him the injection. I said, "How was it?" And he said it was okay, but I knew it had to be better than what he got from whoever else was injecting him, because his whole bottom was bruised with contusions and hard with scar tissue. You couldn't really penetrate the skin. She didn't blame him for wanting it. Demerol is a great way to start the day when you're around what he was around. But there, on the continuation of their first date, Sheila had an epiphany. I knew that I had been sent there for the downfall. I have always been a believer, and I've always known that there is a higher power. I knew that Priscilla met him to marry him, and Linda met him for the girls' time, and I met him for the downfall. That's what I felt my job was, and I accepted it. I never thought that I would fall in love with him. I just loved him and wanted to take care of him. He wanted to take care of her too, but first he had to put his mark on her. When the shot worked its magic, he had Joe order up a fashion show from Susie Cream Cheese, who brought over racks and racks of dresses. "When you walk through that showroom," he told Sheila, "I want everybody's eyes on you. I want everybody to know you're mine. I don't want to know that you even existed before this moment. You were born just for me." When they finally made love, she was afraid. She'd tried it once with her last boyfriend, and she was too dry and he couldn't enter her. And then there was all that guilt tied in with her religion, so it was emotional and confusing. She'd never heard of a man who preferred pumping to actual sex. In the Catholic faith, he'd get warts on his hand. But Elvis was thinking of her benefit, so she wouldn't get pregnant. He pulled out and finished himself off and put it all over my belly. The first thing that crossed my mind was, oh my God, he's perverted, because I was just so naive. My second thought was that I wasn't enough woman, that my vagina must have been the size of the Grand Canyon, and that he was bouncing off my insides, so he had to hold on to himself. I thought he was so much more sophisticated, so it had to be me. Eventually, Dr. Nick advised her to go on birth control. Yet sometimes she and Elvis just wrestled on the bed and had pillow fights, or he'd tell her stories, like the time he dry-humped a famous British pop star in her pantyhose and rubbed himself raw. But when they did become more intimate, it was a familiar ritual. He did this little dance. It was the "we're going to do it" dance, his little mating call. He was uncomfortable with the beginning of it, so he'd walk on one side of the bed. As soon as he had a certain look on his face, he would turn away and scratch his head, make sure the lights were right, and then pull off one of his shoes and then one of mine, and talk about the weather for 5 or 6 minutes. At the time, I thought it was just adorable because I knew what was coming, so I would get a little wet. Despite all the women he'd been with, she was surprised that he was still shy at certain aspects of lovemaking, though he liked giving oral sex. He would start at my ankles and then go up, and once he had his head in my muff, with his hands reaching up to my breasts, all of his shyness went right out the window. He made jokes, and he would come up and look me straight in the eyes. Because she was inexperienced, at first she wasn't sure if she really had an orgasm. Elvis was a tender lover, but she couldn't relax enough, she thought. To help her through it, Elvis said an Indian wise man had told him that there was one way to find out for certain if a man had satisfied his woman. He said that if the lips on her face were cool, she'd had an orgasm, because all of the blood had rushed to her vagina. Once I was familiar with the story, he would make references to it. And then, when I would be making the appropriate noises and sounds of ecstasy, he'd say, "Okay, I'll see if I took care of my baby." She didn't want to disappoint him, so a couple times I was quick to wet my lips and breathe in. I didn't want him to think he hadn't done the job. Then one time I was getting ready to wet my lips, and before I knew it, I was in full-blown orgasm. I was like, "Oh my God," and he laughed so hard. With Sheila, he rarely asked for oral sex in return. Generally, he thought that's what prostitutes were for, not girlfriends, though Sheila thought it had to do with the fact that he wasn't circumcised. He didn't seem to want it. He was a giver, and it didn't stop at giving cars and jewelry. Even sexually, he was a giver. They were good together, at least for a while, and Elvis seemed completely under her spell, bemused by her crooked smile and what he called her bubble butt. However, their sexual appetites didn't always match. She understood his rules that I was never to be a first thing in the morning kind of girl, and that there couldn't be a natural odor to me anywhere. But she hadn't counted on the sleeping pills. One morning, she had douched, showered, powdered, puffed, dressed, and prettied to his expectations, and now it was Sheila who did the mating dance. First, she tickled his nose with a feather, but she watched in frustration as it rose and fell to the breath of slumber. Next, she took all his rings from the bedside table, put them on her own fingers, and made tapping sounds, sitting right next to him on the bed. I didn't want to get in trouble, but I wanted to play. I wanted to make love, and I really wanted him in me. But he didn't wake up, And I was sitting there and sitting there. In his conscious moments, Elvis appreciated Sheila most of all because she made him laugh, and he found her naivete fresh and disarming. He liked to roll her middle name, Marie, together with her first, so it came out as a mush of sound, Sheila Marie. But he also had several nicknames for her based on her haircut. One was Dennis, for Dennis the Menace, and the second was Chickenhead. The latter was reminiscent of what he'd said to actress Goldie Hawn when he met her while taping the '68 special. He walked up to me and he tousled my hair and he said, "You look like a chicken that's just been hatched." Surely Dew understood that the concept of an intelligent girl who acted like a ditz was a turn-on for him. That's how Sheila was, like Goldie Hawn. She had that same dumb blonde personality. Priscilla asked me one time, "What is it that Elvis sees in Sheila? She's not his type." But she would just say the stupidest things. For example, if Elvis would walk in the room and everybody would be really quiet, Sheila would be like, "What? Why is everybody quiet?" And then laugh. She just was oblivious to it all, and she would think out loud when she talked like, I don't know, It was cute and just really funny, and that's what made her entertaining. One person who wasn't entertained was Linda Thompson. After Sheila had been alone in Vegas with Elvis for 8 days, Linda found out about it. And as Shirley remembers, Linda was so jealous of her that she had us all convinced that Sheila was a hooker. She told everybody that Joe had picked her up, and after he had paid for her, she wanted to be with Elvis. Shirley actually believed it for a while and then learned better. Elvis and Linda had a terrific row over Sheila on the phone during Sheila's first stay, and it opened Sheila's eyes to both the volatility and the importance of his relationship with her. I heard a tone coming out of him that was so guttural that I thought, he must be fighting with Priscilla. I was in the bathroom and I stayed there, because I didn't even want to believe that there was someone in his life who could make him this angry. She was just letting him have it, and he was explaining to her when he would be home and when she could come see him again, and it was very, very disturbing. He was saying, "You've always got to do it, don't you? You've always got to twist the knife so that my gut can't even breathe." He just got vehement, and that's when I came to find out that Linda, who he let on was just a girl, was very much a part of his life. That was a rude awakening for me. What puzzled Linda the most was how paradoxical Elvis was in terms of romance. On the one hand, she knew that he loved her immeasurably and that he was devoted to her emotionally. He took the time to articulate his feelings, saying, "I know that I haven't been completely faithful to you. I know that you don't understand a lot of the things that I do, but you have to know that you could never be with anyone who would love you more." And so they would remain in each other's lives. But there would continue to be plenty of competition. Not only would Linda and Sheila pass each other on the moving sidewalk in the Las Vegas airport at one point, but when Sheila went on tour with him in March 1974, Elvis had Marty pick up Ann Pennington in Monroe, Louisiana, while someone else took the departing Sheila to the plane. For Ann, I had a little ouch about it, but it was like, that's the way it is. After March, Sheila didn't hear from him for months, understanding that she and Linda were sort of running a horse race. We were neck and neck, and then I fell behind. And so she moved to Los Angeles and made no effort to get in touch with him. During the interim, Elvis reconciled with Linda, threw a 23rd birthday party for her in May, and let her redecorate Graceland in a brilliant red color scheme, replacing the original blue. Linda was the woman who best met his tricky combination of requirements: sexy yet motherly, gentle but feisty, and perhaps most important, spiritual. Still, Elvis thought he hadn't found exactly what he was looking for, and one night that spring, he took Larry Geller aside at the Monavale house. "I've got to meet someone, man. You know a lot of women. Fix me up." To Larry, it was preposterous. Elvis was the biggest sex symbol there was. "I don't know, Elvis," Larry said. But then he thought of Michelle Myers, who booked rock groups for all of the clubs and knew every girl in town. Larry dialed the phone. "Oh, I know this girl, and she'd be great," Michelle told him. That evening, Elvis sent one of the guys to pick her up and bring her to the house for a party. But when she came in the door, Elvis turned sharply to his friend. His eyes popped open and it was like, "What in the hell did you do to me?" She was disabled and hobbled in on a cane. Elvis treated her as he did all the rest of the women there that night. "Honey, would you like some food?" And she settled in with the group. But when the conversation grew dull, Elvis turned to Larry's younger sister, Judy, a live wire who had come up to the house a number of times. At 5'6" and 120 pounds, Judy was tall and thin, with long dark hair and green eyes, and Elvis had always liked her. He'd also met her twin, Elaine, some years back when Larry brought her on one of the movie sets. Elvis was sitting on the couch with beautiful women on each side of him, but they were posed like mannequins. They were afraid to talk to him, Judy remembers. In contrast, and just to breathe some air into the room, she peppered him with questions. "Elvis, how did you get your black belt?" The night wore on, and about 1:30 a.m., Larry suggested it was time to go. Judy walked over to Elvis, still on the couch and surrounded by women, and kissed him briefly on the lips. "Nice seeing you," she said. She was almost out the door when he yelled out, "Hey, I never kissed you before." Judy shot him a flirty glance. "It wasn't so bad," she purred. That's all he had to hear. He got up, grabbed my arm, walked me out to the car, took my purse off my hand, and started French kissing me in the car. "Oh my God," Larry thought, "my sister with Elvis." He hurried away with a quick goodbye. Now Elvis looked Judy square in the face. "Will you stay?" "Absolutely not," she said. "You're with another woman." "Will you come back again tomorrow night? I won't be then." "I'd love to," she said. But deep down, I was scared out of my mind. Out of my mind! I took a Valium to go to his house. She was so frightened, in fact, that Larry had to drive her, steering the car up to the gates and through all of the screaming girls who taunted, "You can't get in! You won't get in!" Inside, Lisa Marie did cartwheels and handstands to entertain her father's guests. After a quick hello all around, Judy sat next to Elvis on the couch, while Larry and a few of the guys filled the rest of the chairs in the den. Larry was even more nervous than his sister, and finally blurted, "I can't take this. I have to go." Soon everyone else left too, and then it was just Judy and Elvis watching television. After a while, Elvis said, "Come on, let's go upstairs." His bed, big and round, sat in a curved wall of mirrors, so that wherever you looked, you'd see Elvis. Judy stared at the ornate chamber of seduction, felt her heart jump, and almost lost her nerve. I was thinking, I can't believe this. It was stunning. But it paled in comparison to the sight of Elvis emerging from the bathroom in navy blue pajamas, piped in powder blue. He really was to die for. I couldn't even look at him. I thought, I'm with Jesus Christ. That's how powerful he was, like nothing you have ever seen before. He was so hot it was scary. The elegant pajamas never came off, but it didn't matter. He and Judy spent the whole night hugging and kissing, doing everything and nothing. The high point came when he laid on top of me, held my face in his hands, looked into my eyes and said, "I love your mouth." I can't believe I didn't pass out. But Elvis soon did. Around 3 a.m., he asked if she minded going downstairs and getting his dinner. The cook had left it in the refrigerator, he said. "You'll know what it is when you see it." Judy made her way to the kitchen, fixed his plate, gathered the silverware, and brought it all upstairs, only to find him lost to the world. I said, "Elvis? Elvis?" I thought he was dead. I didn't know. I was scared. I took my finger and pushed on his eye to see if I could get a reflex. I didn't see him take anything, but whatever he took hit him hard. She stayed with him, not really knowing what to do. And after a while, he got up, ate a little, and then fell back to sleep, not waking again until 8 a.m. "Will you spend the night with me?" he asked, meaning the rest of the day. But Judy had had enough. At that point, I was so freaked out, I said, "You know what? I think I should go." Elvis looked disappointed, but called for one of his stepbrothers. "Open the gates," he said through muzzy speech, "and make sure she gets out okay." His appetites continued to run more to the cosmic than the carnal. In late August 1974, he was back in Vegas, and on September 3rd, he took in Tom Jones's performance at Caesar's Palace, climbing up on stage with a Welsh star who had been his friend since the 1960s and singing American Trilogy. Afterward, actress and beauty pageant winner Susan Anton was invited back, where Elvis started showing her his karate technique. Soon, he suggested they take the party over to his suite. The two of them sat talking on the couch for a while, and then he said, "Come with me. I have something to show you." I thought, uh-oh, here it is. This is the move. He took me down the hallway to his personal room and motioned for me to sit in a chair. And then he sat on a footstool in front of me and began reading from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. Even though Elvis was an icon, Susan could see he was just a sweet country boy under all that. It was like talking to a big brother. Whether Susan realized it or not, Sheila was with him that night. By August, when she still hadn't heard from him, she phoned him in Vegas, and he invited her to fly over when Linda, who attended opening night, went home. He'd garnered terrific reviews, The Hollywood Reporter calling it the best show in at least 3 years. Presley looks great, is singing better than he has in years, and was so comfortable with his show, almost all new songs. The packed Hilton showroom gave him several standing ovations. But on September 2nd, his closing night, when Sheila, Priscilla, and Lisa Marie were in attendance, he delivered 2 long stream-of-consciousness monologues in which he seemed compelled to explain the recent events of his life. He was just coming out of Marty Robinson's song, You Gave Me a Mountain, and started by saying the song had nothing to do with him or his ex-wife. "She's right here," he said of Priscilla. "Honey, stand up." Applause. "Come out, honey. Come out. Come on out. Turn around, let them see you." More applause. "Boy, she's a beautiful chick. I'll tell you sure, boy. Boy, I knows 'em when I picks 'em. You know? God damn." "And then at the same booth as my girlfriend Sheila. Stand up, Sheila." Applause. Turn around, completely around. "Sheila, hold it up, hold it up, hold the ring up, hold up the ring, your right hand. Look at that son of a bitch." Priscilla sank deep into the booth as Elvis began discussing the reasons for the divorce. The $2 million settlement and Mike Stone, purposely confusing the words stud and Stutz, referencing the car. "Mike Stone ain't no stud, so forget it," he said. "I wish Mike was a stud, you know. He's a nice guy." He went on to sing Softly as I Leave You, but then later in the evening he was at it again, this time trotting out the Patricia Parker paternity rumor, saying, "I had a picture made with that chick and that's all, and she got pregnant by the camera." The audience responded nervously, mixing tight laughter with applause, and seemed to fear what might come next. Now Elvis wanted to address another rumor, that he had missed shows because he had been strung out on drugs. He had the flu, he insisted, his voice growing angrier and more agitated. "If I find or hear an individual that has said that about me," he ranted, "I'm going to break their goddamn neck, you son of a bitch." Screams and applause. "That is dangerous. I will pull your goddamn tongue out by the roots." And with that, he bizarrely switched gears and calmly segued into Hawaiian Wedding Song from Blue Hawaii. "I was in shock," Priscilla said later, because in the past he would never ever let on to the audience what his emotions were. This was so out of character for someone who had so much pride. Everything that he was against, he was displaying. It was like watching a different person. Sheila was also perplexed. He'd given her the ring just before the performance, and I was a little frightened because I thought maybe he was going to ask me to marry him. It was a crystal ring with diamonds set on the top, and it was huge. I was excited by it, and then disappointed when I realized what it was all about. It was so he could introduce me and have Priscilla turn green with envy. When he said, "Show them the ring, baby," I mean, he made that ring big enough for the entire showroom to see from the balcony. Sheila was confused about all of it, including where she stood in his life. They went to Palm Springs together for 5 days afterward, and then Elvis went home to Memphis, to Linda, who wasn't certain about her role either. While he was there, he bought Billy and Joe Smith a 1975 Woodcrest double-wide trailer with 3 bedrooms and installed it in back of Graceland. The entourage of old hardly existed anymore. The guys were all getting older now, and they had different priorities and families of their own. Out in California, Elvis had called Patty Perry, who was engaged to be married and living in Malibu with her fiancé. He said, "You've got to come up here now." I said, "Elvis, I'm moving." He said, No, I need a haircut." I said, "I just cut your hair." He said, "Please." So I left, and when I got up there, he gave me a mink jacket. I said, "You're not losing me. You'll never lose me." He got nervous because he didn't have that many friends. Not really. Elvis had added some new guys to help with costumes and security in recent years. Al Strada, karate expert Dave Hepler, and soon he'd bring in Dr. Nick's son, Dean. His stepbrothers, too, had taken on some of the old responsibilities. But Elvis didn't feel the loyalty from them that he had from the old gang. And Red, who Sheila considered to be the only real friend Elvis ever had, knew that the Stanleys numbered among Elvis's drug connections, along with a member of the backing group, Voice. When Red found out the singer was supplying Elvis with hard drugs, his famous temper rushed to the fore. "I kicked the door in. I stomped the guy's foot and broke it, said, 'You keep bringing them, I'm just gonna work my way up.'" Everybody thought it was a good idea if Billy Smith were just a little closer to keep an eye on things. Elvis had now reached a critical level of drug use. On September 27, 1974, before a show at Cole Field House in College Park, Maryland, Tony Brown, Elvis's new keyboard man who joined the show that fall as part of Voice, watched in anguish as Elvis fell to his knees getting out of the limousine. "I don't even know how we got him on the plane," Red told Sonny. His performance that night reflected his woozy state, and fans and reviewers alike expressed dismay. In the audience was Barbara Hearn, Elvis's Memphis girlfriend from 1956. She was living in the Washington, D.C. area with her husband, James Smith, and they attended the show with 2 other couples. "Oh, I was so sad. I had planned to go down and speak to Mr. Presley, and I would have gone back to say hello to Elvis too, but after sitting through the show, I didn't want to. I had wanted my friends to see how special he was, but he was anything but special." 33. Flickering White Light. In October, Elias Ghanem became increasingly concerned about Elvis's distended colon and ordered a series of tests. The results were not extraordinary, but Elvis was now traveling with a trunk of Fleet's enemas, which some of the guys groused about carrying, and his bowels were so unpredictable that he would often sleep with a towel wrapped around his midsection. Lamar saw that he would be so damn drugged up he couldn't make it to the bathroom, or he'd get in there and start back out, and be so groggy he'd fall down on the floor. That's where they'd find him. Dr. Ghanem had recently added a new wing onto his house for celebrity patients and suggested that Elvis come there for a sleep diet, for which he would be sedated and take only liquid nourishment. The idea was to force Elvis to rest, and in the process, let him lose 15 pounds before his next tour. Sheila took the first shift, staying about a week. Linda would return with him for a second stint in December. Elvis originally told Sheila about it when they were lying in bed on Montevideo. She didn't like the sound of it, but he said, "Baby, Ghanem's got the sleep diet, and it was the first time that he and I were making a decision together, and I didn't want to nix it." There was no way that Elvis could be kept totally asleep without general anesthesia, Sheila learned, and Dr. Ghanem was often not there. "It was the worst time that I ever endured," she says. Elvis often woke up in the middle of the night and wanted a papaya shake, but it wouldn't be time for it, or he would spill it, and as soon as Sheila changed the sheets, he'd soil them. Then she'd get him up and take him to the bathroom, but he would have to crawl. I would stay awake all night. I had my entire face break out from the stress. In September, when Elvis was home in Memphis, he met 14-year-old Rika Smith, a friend of Ricky Stanley. His 40th birthday loomed in January, and Elvis was doing everything he could to stave off depression. It was the number he had set for himself to deliver his message to the world, and he felt defeated, but he still hadn't found his purpose. Rika, with her long, thick blonde hair, was just the sort of young girl he always delighted in mentoring. He was dating Linda at the time, but he mentioned that I reminded him of Lisa because we both had blonde hair. He came over to my house and met my parents, and my dad just loved him because he was so friendly and such a gentleman. Elvis told him, "With the age difference, you probably think it's crazy for me to see your daughter, but I think she is a wonderful girl, and I have great intentions." He called her his Lil Lioness for a jacket she wore with a big fur collar. He said he loved the way it framed my face. The relationship lasted only a few months, and mostly they spent time just hanging out and watching television downstairs at Graceland. He needed somebody to keep him company, and he took delight in buying her nice outfits, including a long, ornate suede and leather coat that fed her dream of becoming a model. When he gave me the clothes, he was just like a kid. He was so excited seeing me happy. Elvis also counseled her about the dangers of prescription drugs, saying he didn't ever want to catch her taking them. In fact, Ricky tried to give me something one time, and Elvis heard about it, and oh my goodness, he hit the ceiling. Overall, Rika considered Elvis to be extremely protective. He didn't take advantage of me. He kissed me, but they were just sweet, innocent kisses. There were a few make-out sessions, and we would make out for a long time, but that's all. Nothing where he would try to go any further. I remember he would kiss me and say, "You are just a beautiful little girl." Her father, Ed Smith, let her accept the silver Trans Am Elvis bought her, even though she wasn't old enough to drive. But when Elvis wanted to take her on a plane ride to Nashville, Ed drew the line. Rika was ready to end it anyway, which she did in February 1975. I saw the decline in his health and it scared me. He had gained a lot of weight over that period, and he just didn't seem as happy. It upset me, just knowing his situation. I got to where I would tell my mom I didn't even want to take his calls, because I just felt helpless, and it was sad seeing it happen. One day when Rika was there, Elvis called everyone in the house to his room, where he held a meditation, a séance really, to talk to Gladys. Rika hated hearing him slurring, just really kind of out of it, since he tried to be alert whenever he was with her. It broke my heart. He told his mother how much he missed her, and that he loved her, and that he couldn't wait to see her. I got a weird feeling when he was talking to her, because it was like a sadness came over the room. Then he wanted to be alone for a little bit, and everybody left. In late December, the Colonel canceled Elvis's January 1975 engagement in Vegas, citing health reasons. It was a prophetic call. About 7 a.m. on January 29th, Elvis and Linda were sleeping at Graceland when I woke up and I felt something wasn't right. His breathing was strange, so I shook him and I said, "Honey, are you okay?" He said, "I can't get my breath." So I called for the nurse and she brought some oxygen over, and we had to rush him to the hospital. Again, Linda stayed with him for 2 weeks, during which time Elvis grew a beard. And while the Colonel issued a statement that Elvis was undergoing tests on his liver, Dr. Nick once more tried to find a way to control Elvis's use of prescription drugs. In the middle of that chaos, Vernon suffered a heart attack and was admitted to Baptist Memorial Hospital, where he recuperated in the room next to his son. When Elvis was discharged on Valentine's Day, either Dr. Nick or Nurse Henley came by each afternoon to dole out a controlled amount of medication. By March, their patient was feeling well enough to record again, flying out to Los Angeles and going into RCA's Sunset Boulevard studios on the 10th. He brought along both Lisa Marie and Sheila, to whom he sang Don McLean's And I Love You So, begging his girlfriend to "Step up here, Sheila, let me sing to you, baby." On the 18th, he began making up his Vegas dates, and 10 days into the engagement, he received actress-singer Barbra Streisand and her boyfriend John Peters, formerly her hairdresser, in his dressing room. The pair hoped to interest him in their updated remake of A Star is Born, casting Elvis as the aging rock icon in love with the rising young starlet. Elvis was gleeful at the challenge. hungering for a serious role that would make everybody forget his string of celluloid humiliations. He was poignant in his discussions with Kathy Westmoreland, telling her it was his last opportunity to prove himself on the screen. People aren't going to remember me because I've never done anything lasting. I've never made a classic film to show what I can do. But to the guys, he was more upbeat, excitedly saying, "Can you believe that Barbra Streisand wants me to be with her in that movie?" Yet after much back and forth, the Colonel denounced it as too cheap a deal, saying Streisand and Peters were only trying to take advantage of him. Once he got over his initial disappointment, Elvis too came to that decision and worried that a loser's role might actually make him seem like a loser. He was really more upset than most people know, Priscilla says. The Colonel, who would never allow his client to accept second billing anyway, helped him save face in the press. "There was never no plan for him to do A Star is Born. He told me to make the contract stiff enough where they would turn it down 'cause he did not want to do it." That spring, Sheila came home with him to Graceland, where he talked to her about moving in. He was finished with Linda, he said. It was not precisely true, even though he bought her a house in Memphis and an apartment in Los Angeles so that she could pursue an acting career. Linda was furious that Sheila was in Memphis, and when she started spending a lot of his money in retaliation, $30,000 on his MasterCard alone, the words "gold digger" floated around the group. She was a beauty queen, and she knew how to get what she wanted, Sheila says. But Linda had her defenders, too, Billy suggesting she'd earned it, and Marty insisting Elvis encouraged her to spend money so she'd be away and he could do as he pleased. Sheila, meanwhile, found Elvis increasingly difficult to be around and worried that he might be having a breakdown. At the Memphian one night, she asked him a technical question about film, and coming on the heels of the Streisand debacle, it seemed to open a floodgate of anger and resentment about the mismanagement of his Hollywood career. He insisted they immediately leave the theater, and on the way home he stopped at a drugstore, where they pulled a Bonnie and Clyde, Sheila distracting the druggist with questions about menstrual products, while Elvis cleaned out the pharmacy. Later, he mailed the druggist a check. That same spring, Elvis met 24-year-old model actress Mindy Miller through Ron Smith, who later became well known for establishing the Celebrity Lookalikes firm. Ron was another of Elvis's friends who promised to be on the lookout for girls, and ran into Mindy at a Hollywood disco called the Candy Store. Elvis had just broken up with Linda Thompson, Ron told her, and invited her to a party at the Holmby Hills house. But when Mindy arrived, she found only Elvis's guys, who proceeded to screen her as their boss's potential new girlfriend. At 5'8", Mindy was tall like Linda and shared a beauty pageant background, but she was also smart, poised, and utterly unimpressed with celebrities, having come from a family of performers. But meeting Elvis was something that intrigued her. She'd seen him driving on Sunset Boulevard some time before in his Stutz Blackhawk, with his slicked back hair and EP glasses, and she had a premonition she would someday know him. However, that night, when the guys gave Elvis the signal and he strode into the room in a tennis hat, she didn't even recognize him. It was a funny bit of business that broke the ice. From the beginning, they settled into a natural groove. He looked at her in astonishment when she turned down a ring. "I'm sorry, I wasn't raised to take an expensive gift from a man like that." And he was more impressed when she said no to a car, though later she did accept a Trans Am. They spent the first night together without even kissing. Mostly, they laughed and talked, and even sang a little bit, both of them, Elvis launching into his new song, Trouble, just as if he were on stage. He just sang his little heart out. They discussed mystical matters, particularly numerology, and how everything in the Bible is a dividend of 7, the highest spiritual number that there is. And he gave her a set of his favorite little books so they could talk about them on the phone. Mindy shared his open mind and fascination with such subjects, and she could tell how desperate he was for a real connection. But he was upbeat with her, even when he eventually told her that, "When I die, there will be certain people that I will contact and be in touch with beyond the grave." He also told her he was afraid of the dark, and thanked her for not laughing at him. At 7 a.m., as she was leaving, he put on a karate demonstration for her with the guys and asked if she'd like to learn the discipline. "I'd love to," she replied, "but I won't be here. I'm moving back to Rome." Elvis was shocked. "What do you mean? You don't live here?" She explained that most of her work was in Europe and that it only made sense for her to live there. Elvis turned to the guys and told them they could go, and then he asked Mindy to come back upstairs to the bedroom. "Listen," he said, "you know I would like to see you again. Do you have to move back to Europe?" "Well, I don't have to, but I just came back to close up my apartment and sell my car. Everything is packed and ready to go. I'm supposed to leave in 3 days." "No," Elvis said, shaking his head. "You can't. I won't let you." Then he called downstairs to the guys. "Make sure you get her number and address. She's coming on the next tour." "Look, Elvis," she said, "I'll be very straight with you. I have no intention of staying here, but if I did, it would only be to be your girlfriend." "Fair enough," he countered. "You're my girlfriend." But he had to be honest, too. It wasn't in him to commit to just one woman. He was put on Earth to entertain, and he belonged to the world. That might have sounded crazy to a lot of people, but Mindy knew it was true. He kissed her then and sent her home to get some sleep. But she had hardly gotten home when he was on the phone. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm really looking forward to showing you my life," he said, and the next day he wrote her a $5,000 check to retrieve her things from Rome and set up her apartment again. She went with him on tour that April, where she made a lifelong friend of Shirley Dew. But when she landed in Florida, it was the guys who gave her the real indoctrination to life with Elvis. They took me aside and said, "There are certain rules you need to follow. First, you don't leave Elvis alone. If he gets up in the middle of the night and goes to the bathroom, you get up with him. Then you knock on the door to see if he's okay, and then make sure that he gets back to bed. If for some reason he doesn't answer or something's wrong, here's who to call." Like Linda, Mindy watched him constantly and refused to leave him unattended, laying her head on his chest as he slept to monitor his breathing, and putting my hand under his nostrils to make sure there was air. But she never saw him OD or abuse medication, and balked at giving him shots of anything stronger than vitamin B12. I took care of him, so on my watch nothing ever happened. The Florida dates consisted of 4 nights in Jacksonville, Tampa, and Lakeland. In Jacksonville, Jackie Rowland, now all grown up and married with 3 children, tried frantically to get in touch with Jerry Schilling at the hotel. Ken Floyd, of the coaching staff of Memphis State, had passed along Jerry's name. Ken told her that Elvis could use her help, that he wrestled with serious drug addiction, and that most of his hospital stays were for detoxing. Jerry was one of the few people around Elvis who tried to act in his best interest, he said. Jackie called Jerry's room from downstairs, but when she got no answer, she asked the desk clerk to ring the room next to it. It was Elvis's room, but Red answered. She told him about her long association with Elvis, Vernon, and Gladys, and that she had pictures to prove it. Red made remarks she found offensive. I told him I was a lady and that Gladys would be rolling over in her grave for his being so disrespectful. And after that, he grew angry, saying if she wanted to see Elvis, she should have called earlier. "You don't need to see him anyway," he barked. "Elvis has changed. I'm busy trying to get him ready for the show, and he's nothing but a problem. I have to give him injections in his feet because there isn't any place left on him to give them." Then he hung up, leaving Jackie sad and bewildered. The next morning, Mindy received a reprimand as well, only from Elvis, when she turned up at the breakfast table wearing a robe, her hair up in a towel. Honey," he began. "Yeah?" "I don't mind the towel or the robe, but next time I want you to put on some eye makeup or something. You're looking a little scary." They both burst out laughing, and then Mindy asked, "Do I have to do it now?" "No, honey," he told her, "but when you're done with breakfast, get all made up. Look real pretty." She understood the drill, that Elvis's girlfriend did not smoke or drink in public, and that she looked like a proper lady at all times. But the brunette drew the line on dyeing her hair black, and when he wanted her to have cosmetic dental work, "You need bigger teeth, they're tiny," She said a model couldn't just make drastic changes overnight. Their relationship was healthy enough that they could openly discuss all kinds of things, including Elvis's weight. He told her he was embarrassed about it and worried that his fans might not still love him. Mindy assured him that they did, but she also pointed out that he had no conception of nutrition, calories, or portion sizes. When he ate a gargantuan salad and insisted, "It's just a salad, baby. I'm not going to gain weight," she'd say, "Elvis, yes you are. It's big enough for 5 people." At another time in his life, they might have made it work. She cared about him and promised him she would always be there for him whenever he needed her. While she would see other men, she took no serious boyfriend, as he had asked. But when Elvis found out she'd been involved with black actor football star Fred Williamson, and while it preceded their own relationship, he pulled the plug, just as he had on Joan Blackman when he heard she'd dated a black man too. He wasn't a racist person, Mindy clarifies. That's just the way he was raised. And so she continued to be a part of his support team, if only by phone. The one thing she didn't miss was the touring, which she considered both grueling and boring. Sheila, who didn't like the road either, went back on tour with him in June 1975 and found it even more intolerable than before. She knew he was tired of playing the same towns over and over, that he needed the lift of a European engagement or something stimulating to break the routine. But she also suspected that a lot of his moodiness was due to what was in his black bag of pharmaceuticals, which she was in charge of carrying. Elvis was so irritable that the slightest thing set him off. He had a huge tantrum in Mobile on June 2nd when he found she didn't have her slippers. Then, when she announced she needed to go home for a mammogram, she could feel the heat coming off of him at the breakfast table. I never would dare say, "What's the matter, honey?" But his pajama sleeve caught the creamer and tipped it over, and then he cleared the whole table with his arm and my scrambled eggs too, and he said, "You and your fucking tumor." He didn't want me to go, but I needed the rest. One day with Elvis was like 5 with anybody else. Gone were the days when they'd check into some crummy motel on the road and make love in the afternoons. Everybody on tour had known about it, because after Elvis's daily shot of Valium, he'd get so randy that, while all the guys were bringing things in, I had to get in my jammies. Now Joe was telling her to get out of this mess, and Ann Pennington, who had become her friend through another girl in LA, was trying to introduce her to new people. That July, after Elvis had recuperated from a cosmetic eye procedure he'd had in mid-June, Sheila was supposed to meet him in Uniondale, New York. But she didn't want to go. In fact, she met actor James Caan through Anne and had already committed to marry him. Nobody wanted to tell Elvis just yet, so they made up a story that she couldn't fly due to an ear infection. Determined to have Sheila with him, Elvis told her he'd send a low-flying plane for her. But when she begged off again, he angrily said he would call when he got home. After that, he could barely contain his rage, even on stage. In Uniondale on July 19th, he threw a guitar into the crowd and yelled, "Whoever got the guitar can keep the damned thing. I don't need it anyway." The following night in Norfolk, Virginia, he was still out of control, repeating crude sexual remarks about Kathy Westmoreland that he had made in other cities. "She will take affection from anybody, any place, anytime. In fact, she gets it from the whole band." After that, he raised eyebrows, saying he smelled green peppers and onions, and that the sweet inspirations had probably been eating catfish. Finally, a few days later, he accidentally shot Dr. Nick in an Asheville, North Carolina hotel room, though the bullet, which ricocheted off a chair and hit the physician in the chest, did no real damage. Taking Sheila's place that tour was 24-year-old Diana Goodman, the reigning Miss Georgia USA, who Elvis had picked out of a group of fans at the Graceland gates. In some of their photographs, the curvaceous blonde appears dazed, as if the routine of plane, limo, hotel, show, and dealing with a highly unpredictable host was a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. Part of it was fear, and part was just awe. I had lived a simple life growing up and didn't know how to behave around the paparazzi, and there was always this huge crowd to make your way through in a vehicle. He was real protective, but I was just big-eyed, wondering if we were going to get out of there. Though their relationship disintegrated at tour's end, Elvis didn't like it that she wanted to pursue a career in TV or film. Their communication lasted about a year. When Diana heard he was ill and wanted to go visit him, Charlie Hodge, their go-between, discouraged her. Later, she learned Elvis was dating someone else. That's when I found out we were broken up. He'd shared his visions for the two of us together, and he was so attentive that I thought I was going to be there forever. Elvis's weight had ballooned well over 200 pounds again, but more disturbing was his bloat. He looked as if he might pop and spiral heavenward. More disturbing, his roundness made him appear as if he were morphing into Gladys. It was as if she had begun to reclaim him. On the way to play his Vegas dates that August, he again had trouble breathing on the plane. It made a forced landing in Dallas, and after recuperating in a motel for several hours, he continued on. Joyce Bova slipped into Vegas with Janice to see if the rumors about his appearance were true. I thought he must be sick. That show was such a sad sight. He even had trouble trying to straddle a chair. Joan Blackman had also heard reports and went to Vegas to see if she could make a connection. I was just so taken aback. I had changed too, but when I first saw him, I was stunned. It wasn't just the weight. I saw something that made me very sad. I felt like something had been taken away. 3 days later, the Colonel canceled the rest of the engagement, and Elvis went home to be hospitalized again, this time for multiple ailments. His colon, a fatty liver, a high cholesterol count, general fatigue, and depression. Once again, Linda stayed with him in the hospital. Marion Koch, the motherly supervisor of nursing services, came by to see him. And when Dr. Nick suggested that Elvis continue his 24-hour home care, Elvis asked for Mrs. Koch, whom he had previously met during his January stay, to supplement Tish Henley. However, watching over Elvis, Vernon, and Minnie May seemed taxing for even 2 women, so Marion, who never accepted a salary for it, suggested alternating shifts with yet another nurse from the hospital, Kathy Seaman. The night before Elvis's discharge, he signed a picture of himself, "To Mrs. Koch, the sex symbol of the Baptist." And when Jerry cracked a joke about Koch and Seaman, Marion picked up an entire pitcher of ice water and poured it down Jerry's shirt. Elvis, who had already surprised the nurse with a white 1976 Pontiac Grand Prix, laughed until he got tears in his eyes and told Marion she was going to fit in just fine at Graceland. Near the end of that summer, 1975, he was melancholy again and called Sheila at 4 a.m. "I want you to come home," he said. What did he mean? She was home. "No, I mean Memphis. I want you at Graceland." There was a great long silence, and then Sheila said she needed some time to think about it. She never really knew if he loved her or if she were just one of the girls, and now she was with Jimmy, and that seemed like the place to stay. She didn't really tell him that, though, just asked about Linda Thompson to shift the focus, and said she was confused. Elvis's voice was so sad she could hardly stand it. She was his last real chance, and he knew it. "Okay, baby," he finally said. They never talked again. Next, he tried 19-year-old Melissa Blackwood, who he'd met earlier in August at a World Football League game. She was just about to give up her crown as queen of the Memphis Southmen, now renamed the Grizzlies. But beauty queen or not, she wasn't used to getting calls at dawn at her parents' house. Elvis sent one of the guys to pick her up at 7 a.m., and when she was ushered into his bedroom and found him sitting up in bed in his pajamas, she didn't know what to think. He patted the massive mattress for her to sit down beside him, and he could tell it made her nervous, even though he promised her nothing would happen. He kind of held my hand, and we just sat and talked, and he called me Brown Eyes. There was a little piece of hair on my forehead that grew down like a cowlick, and he played with that and said, "Look at this hair," just like I was a little child. Soon, He asked her to change into pajamas too, which made her think he was out of his mind. But she did it, the big sleeves falling miles off her hands. He talked about his childhood for a while, told her how sick his daddy had been, and how trapped he felt by his fame. Then, as they sat out on the front porch, he watched her face as a new Grand Prix snaked its way up the drive. "Why?" she asked him. "What did I do to deserve this?" His voice was small and sad. "You came," he said simply. But Melissa could not stay, not after she fed him yogurt and hot cereal, and he started shaking and got so sick he could barely hold his head up. She watched as he took his pills, and when he struggled to swallow, it scared her so her heart fired like a jackhammer in her chest. She asked him not to take any more, saying he didn't need them, that she'd sing him to sleep, do anything to see him feeling better. "All right," he agreed. "Will you just stay and hold my hand?" Every time she thought he was asleep, he'd wake up and grab her arm and say, "Don't go." She saw him a few more times, but it was all just too unnerving, especially when he asked her to move in. "Elvis, I'm sorry. I care, but I can't just move in here," she said. "I care too, babe," he answered. "That's the problem." He was nearly in tears when she left the last time, and though she returned to take him a thank you card, he wasn't there. At the same time he saw Melissa, he began romancing Joe Cathy Brownlee, a bubbly, outgoing junior high health and physical education teacher. They met on August 2nd, 1975, when Elvis attended a Grizzlies game at the Mid-South Coliseum, where Joe Cathy worked part-time as a hostess in the press box. She spent the evening getting him whatever he wanted, pizza, Coke, and he picked up on her nickname, JC, frequently calling her over where he sat with Linda, with whom Joe Cathy had gone to Memphis State. Her friend, Barbara Klein, told her that night that Elvis had been watching her reflection in the glass, and in a way, it all made sense. Like Mindy, Joe Cathy had a strong feeling Elvis would be in her life somehow, dating back to when she was a child in Indianola, Mississippi, and her father would drive her past Graceland on their trips to Memphis. When she first moved to town, she lived in Whitehaven, where a family whose property backed up to Graceland would let her stand on their fence to see him when he was out riding his horse. Then she briefly met him at the Memphian in 1974, and had even dated Charlie for a spell, visiting him in his basement digs at Graceland. In fact, she was so into Elvis that she was taking her mother to see him in Vegas in just a few weeks. When Elvis got up to leave the game on that summer night, Joe Cathy was not shy about telling him goodbye. She took a look at the scarf he wore with his blue leisure suit, thought of the signature scarves he draped around the necks of his fans, and joked, "Is that a real Elvis scarf?" "Well, honey," he said, "not really." And with that, he took it off, put it around her neck, pulled her close, and kissed her. It was right in front of Linda, and I was just like, oh my God. That was a Saturday, and on Monday, Sunny called Barbara and asked how to get in touch with her friend. Elvis wanted to give her $100 for being so nice in the press box. He also wanted a date. "Believe it or not," she says, "I had this sick, sick feeling." As it happened, she had a new boyfriend, and it was love at first sight. She did nothing, then, trying to make up her mind, when Dr. Nick tracked her down on Thursday at Barbara's house to tell her Elvis was trying to reach her. By coincidence, Joe Cathy lived in a duplex owned by Miss Patty, Anita Wood's former landlady. When I got home, the phone was ringing, and this voice said, "JC? EP." He wanted her to come to the house and meet Lisa Marie, and then go to the crosstown that very night. Then, when they returned, he changed into his black Munsingwear pajamas with the red piping that Aunt Delta had bought him at Sears. Joe Cathy already felt as if she knew him. They were both from Mississippi and close to their mothers. So she didn't think, oh, he's going to attack me. But she did think it was odd when he made several phone calls while he was showing her a book on numerology, and then sent her downstairs to look up the word esoteric in the dictionary. It was just a ruse, of course. He'd ordered a new Grand Prix for her, just as he had Melissa, and it was pulling up in the driveway. Elvis walked out in front of me and he turned around and said, "Honey, I hope this one's okay. It was the best I could do at 4 o'clock in the morning." She didn't quite know what to say. She'd just made her last payment on her Ford Grand Torino, and though she knew how funny it sounded, she asked if she could give her old car to her mother, unless Elvis needed it for the trade-in. He had a laugh at that. She could do anything she wanted with her old car, and then told her to hop in. He wanted to drive out to the airport to show her the plane he was in the process of buying, a $900,000 Lockheed Jetstar. She was behind the wheel, and he was sitting beside her, still in his pajamas, when he asked if she had the lights on. Sure, she told him. Farther down the road, he said, "JC, are you sure you have your lights on?" "Oh yeah, my lights are on." Finally, he reached across her lap and pulled the knob, and the highway lit up like daylight. That's when she really felt stupid. But then it wasn't every night she got a car from Elvis. When they got back to the house, they kissed a few times, but he was never too forward with her, and then he laid his heart on the line. "JC, I can tell that you're committed to somebody, and I have to protect my feelings. But if anything changes in your relationship, let me know because I want to see you again." She told him okay, and then she walked out front and climbed behind the wheel of her new car. The sun was coming up as she crawled down the winding drive, and the first thing she thought was, how am I going to explain this to my mother? Elvis was not about to give a girl a new car and just let her leave him in it. So 2 nights later, he showed up at the Grizzlies game and asked if Joe Cathy could sit with him. Near the end of the evening, he asked her to go to Fort Worth to see his other new plane, the Lisa Marie, a $250,000 Convair 880 jet, originally part of the Delta fleet, which was being customized and refurbished at an additional $800,000 as his show plane. From there, they'd probably go on to Las Vegas or Palm Springs, he told her. While it sure sounded good, she said, she couldn't. She had a date. Only a week had passed since she made the remark about the scarf, and he'd kissed her, and she had a lot to process. He then took another girl from the game instead, but when he came back to town, he saw Joe Cathy every night until he left for his Vegas engagement. There, Joe Cathy and her mother were his guests in one of the round booths, and when Linda saw her there, she put 2 and 2 together. For the next 3 months, he would find a way to see Joe Cathy every time Linda was away. Soon, they were spotted around town more and more, particularly at the Crosstown Theater and at the Colonial or Chickasaw country clubs, where they played racquetball with Billy and Joe Smith, George and Barbara Klein, and Billy and Angie Stanley. Elvis had taken up the sport at Dr. Nick's urging and was building his own court at home. He was truly trying to get his act together, she says, though his eating habits, 6 small yogurts at a time from his little refrigerator off the bedroom, were still too poor for him to lose much weight. One day, one of Joe Cathy's pupils asked, "Miss Brownlee, are you dating Elvis Presley?" Joe Cathy told her she didn't discuss her personal life with students, and the child said, "Well, I went home and told my mama that you were dating Elvis Presley, and my mama said there's no way Elvis is dating a PE teacher. He only dates beauty queens and movie stars." Joe Cathy did seem an unusual choice for him, given his history and the fact that they really had little in common. However, they were playful together. At one point, he jokingly told her she could use a nose job, and they both laughed when she said he needed to get his entire body retreaded. But when he brought out The Impersonal Life and asked her to read it to him, she thought, this makes no sense. To this day, I have no idea what that book was about. And while he liked her pretty hands and feet, he couldn't really perform sexually if he were medicated, though it was obvious to her that he hadn't lost his desire. When it came right down to it, she wasn't sure how she would characterize the relationship. I cared a lot about him, and I knew he cared about me, but it wasn't going anywhere. He did tell me a few times that he loved me, but it would be right before he dozed off to sleep. I'm not going to say that it was something that it wasn't, but I wouldn't take anything for it. One of the problems was that Joe Cathy was exhausted from trying to balance Elvis's schedule with her own. In addition to her teaching and Mid-South Coliseum commitments, she logged 2 other part-time jobs. He tried to get her to quit working so she could be with him more, but she had better sense than that, even though it irritated him that she was so tired all the time. "If you yawn one more time, we are out of here," he said at the movies one night. She couldn't help it. She left Graceland at 6:30 a.m. to teach school, and by the time she went home and then got back to Whitehaven about 4:30 or 5, Elvis would just be getting up. They'd have supper together, read, watch TV, or make the usual outings, and then she'd get only about 2 hours sleep before the day started all over again. After a while, she started moving some of her wardrobe there, my nightgowns and my teaching clothes and things that I wore when we would go out, to make things easier. But it wasn't enough for a man who wanted a woman at his beck and call all the time. Then, one Saturday in late October 1975, they got their wires crossed. She arrived at Graceland after one of her part-time jobs, selling tickets at the Coliseum, and Elvis kind of acted like he was surprised to see me. I had gone into the dressing area, and he walked in and he said, JC, I have plans for tonight. Just grab a few of your things and I'll call you tomorrow." Well, I was just worn out and it rubbed me the wrong way. I thought, I am not believing this. I got a clothes basket and just started throwing everything in there. Elvis said, "Look, I just said to grab a few things. You don't have to be such a bitch about it." And I stormed out of there, and that was the last time I saw him. A couple of weeks later, Joe Cathy heard he was dating Dawn Bonner, whose father, Alex, was an award-winning executive at WHBQ. When nothing came of that, Elvis tested the waters with 17-year-old Tanya Tucker during his 2-week engagement in Vegas that December. The singer, a child who sounded like a woman, had become a national sensation at 13 for her grown-up songs of desolate love, including Delta Dawn and Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone. The latter song especially had marked her with something of a racy image. But her father-manager, Bo Tucker, a pipeline worker who fancied himself an eccentric Sharpie along the lines of Colonel Parker, hardly ever let her out of his sight. Bo Tucker had moved his family from Arizona to the Las Vegas area to spur his daughter's career, and Tanya had dreamed of meeting Elvis, with whom she was personally and professionally obsessed, long before she landed a recording contract. He would come into town, and I wanted to see him so bad, but we couldn't afford the $30. She knew he was part of her destiny, though, and their eventual introduction came through Glenn D. Harden, who played piano in both stars' bands. Glenn arranged for Elvis to acknowledge Tanya from the stage. But when a security guard came to take her back after the first show, she remembered her father's advice. "Now, Tanya, that boy can have anybody he wants. Let him know he can't have you." "Hey," she told the guard, "tell Mr. Presley to just wait. I'm signing autographs out here." When she finally went back, Elvis gave her the same treatment, stalling her for more than 30 minutes. She sat down next to Lamar, checking her watch while the other guys proffered Cokes and M&Ms. Finally, she turned to her older sister, LaCosta, and announced in a loud voice, "5 more minutes and we're out of here. I'm not waiting any longer." Suddenly, the door opened and there he was, all in black, a leather coat with a fake fur collar covering a roomy sweatsuit, a damp towel setting it off. At that moment, all of Tanya's brashness melted like a dreamsicle in the Vegas sun. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. I was sitting down, of course, and he looked like he was about 14 or 15 feet tall. He came right over and said, "Lamar, get up, and you've never seen 300 pounds move so quick." Elvis just plopped right down in front of me and got about 2 inches from my face and said, "So how you doing?" I said, "I'm just fine, how are you?" I didn't flinch a bit. Inside, I was just jumping, but I didn't want him to know that. They talked a little bit about music. Glenn had told Elvis that Tanya patterned herself after him some. But then things got personal. She'd driven herself crazy picking the perfect gown from the Lily Rubin shop in Nashville, which catered to women at least twice her age, and when Elvis complimented her footwear, "Man, I love those shoes," Her $250 splurge suddenly seemed worth every penny. Tanya was too nervous to notice, but LaCosta later said, "Oh God, Tanya, when you turned your head, he was looking you up and down. He thought you were sexy." All Tanya knew was that it was a great night. Soon, someone reminded him that it was time to get ready, and Elvis made his move. "Tanya, you want to come back for the second show?" "Oh, no, sir," she said, suddenly 13 again. "I've got to go home and tell my mama and daddy about this." Elvis reached over to kiss her, but his young guest surprised him. "I just gave him the old side cheek, you know, and he laughed so big and hard when I did that. He thought that was just amazing. Who does that to Elvis Presley?" He never forgot her, and 2 years later, as her professional star continued to ascend, he sent her a TLC necklace through Tony Brown, who Bo had once fired from Tanya's band. Tanya had continued to go to Elvis's shows and swoon from her seat, but she had too much of her father in her to graciously accept her gift. "Tell Elvis if he wants to be giving me something, he needs to come give it to me himself." Today, the mother of a daughter named Presley, she cringes at the memory. "Oh my God, how stupid. Just too cocky for my own good." Getting the brush off from yet another teenager seemed to drive 40-year-old Elvis back to women of a more appropriate age range, and before the year was out, he took his wildest shot of all. Hearing that Sonny and Cher had just divorced, Elvis placed a call to the ex-Mrs. Bono, then 29, and invited her for a weekend in Las Vegas. Cher, who had watched his famous 1957 Pan-Pacific Auditorium show standing on her chair as a child, was flabbergasted. "My assistant told me he was on the phone, and at first I thought it was a joke, but I was just too frightened. He'd never stopped being an influence on my life, and sometimes you meet your heroes and you're really disappointed. I thought it would be much better to just have this fantasy about who he was than to be utterly disappointed." As his depression deepened, he spent money like it was never going to stop coming in. He had 3 airplanes now, including a $500,000 Aerojet Commander, and then he bought 14 Cadillacs in one day to the tune of $140,000. Minnie May cautioned him that if he didn't stop such craziness, he was going to end up penniless, but he waved her off with a hug and a smile. "It just means I have to do a longer tour," he said. But then every time he did a tour, every woman he knew got expensive jewelry. "He always gave girls rings," says Shirley Dew. "That was so common. Oh my God, we had a ring on every finger. I'll tell you how much jewelry I had. I remember going to Pips, which was Hefner's private club in LA, and I was sitting there counting up the jewelry on my hand and all the stuff I wore. I had over $250,000 worth of jewelry on my person, and that didn't even include the $25,000 watch that Joe gave me. I was 22 years old." Not surprisingly, Elvis found himself with a cash flow problem, and at the end of November 1975, he borrowed $350,000 from the National Bank of Commerce, pledging Graceland as collateral. On Christmas Eve, he told Marion Cock that he had a dream that all his friends deserted him when he went broke. It threw him into such a fury that he refused to go downstairs and watched the 4 monitors on his closed-circuit video surveillance system until everyone who had been waiting for him went home. The disappointments piled up. The Colonel killed his dream for a karate film, into which he had sunk more than $100,000 over the past year. His beloved orange Chow, 1-year-old Getlow, a dog he and Linda raised together, died after 3 months of treatment near Boston for a congenital kidney ailment. When the end came, Linda remembers, "Elvis was really hurt. We were on tour and they waited to tell him until we were coming home on his plane. He cried. It was like our little buddy had died." And a huge show on New Year's Eve at the unfinished Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, while grossing the record-breaking $816,000, turned out largely to be a bust. Poor sound, frigid weather, one of the musicians plugged in an electric blanket, and Elvis splitting his pants on stage. "I'm scared shitless," he he told MC Jackie Kahane as he mounted the stairs, arriving nearly an hour late. In the end, he didn't do 20 minutes. I figured they'd kill him. Do you know, before we left, they booked him back? That was the magic of Elvis. Sometime that year when Linda was away, Elvis sneaked Barbara Lee into the Monovale house. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, and it made her sad to see him so overweight and lost. She could tell how chaotic his life was, and that he wanted peace. Lisa Marie played with her doll and sang her daddy's songs, and Elvis mostly quoted the Bible. Then he started choking, falling asleep while eating Mexican wedding cookies. I grabbed his head and held it up and slowly made him drink milk. When I told Joe about it, he said, "Most everyone in Elvis's life has saved him at least once." She left around 4 a.m., feeling hopeless. He was way past my help or anyone's at that time. It was like his spirit was beaten down. His white light was flickering. I think in many ways he was ready to leave this earthly plane. Actress Deborah Wally spoke to him in roughly this same time period. He told me that he wasn't going to be around for very long. He was very clear about what he was saying. He said he wasn't going to live a full life, that he was going to exit early. He was done. In January 1976, he spent his 41st birthday in Vail, Colorado, with Linda and 15 others, including his friends on the Denver police force. But what should have been a joyous time turned into one of dissension, with Elvis's moods fluctuating so rapidly that people walked on eggshells, afraid to say anything around him. Jerry even threatened to quit. Then, as Elvis's disposition improved, he started buying Cadillacs and Lincolns for everybody, including his police pals and Linda and Shirley. Total cost, $70,000. At home, work was completed on the racquetball court in back of Graceland, and Joe and Billy Smith would often play with him there. He sequestered himself with the Smiths more and more when he was in Memphis, not wanting to leave the cocoon of home. Even there, he verged on psychosis, his behavior fueled by polypharmacy and professional and personal turmoil. When RCA, needing an album, sent a mobile truck to Graceland in both February and October, Elvis was erratic, showing up the first night in his policeman's uniform and brandishing a Thompson submachine gun at the latter session. Not much got recorded, especially in February, when he retreated to his bedroom with Red and Sonny to plot a violent bloodbath on all the drug dealers in Memphis. He toured one-nighters all through the spring and hid from the Colonel, not wanting to talk with anybody, really, except Billy and Joe. When Lisa Marie visited for 10 days in June, he saw almost no one else. One night, Elvis took 3 or 4 sleeping pills and said to the Smiths, "Let's go put Lisa to bed." They all went in her room, Billy remembers, and Elvis leaned down to kiss her goodnight. When he did, his penis fell out of his pajamas. Elvis didn't notice it. He was telling us, "Oh, ain't she sweet, she's my teddy bear." And Lisa said, "Daddy, your goober is hanging out." It embarrassed him. "Lisa, you don't say things like that, goddammit." Then everybody broke up, even Elvis. One of the things that bothered both Priscilla and Linda was that Elvis wasn't much of a participatory parent, and that he never took on any of the real responsibilities of fatherhood. He slept during the day when Lisa Marie was up and playing, for example, and didn't take her to school or pick her up, not even when she was in preschool. Billy could see that the child was starved for her father's attention, but Elvis's biggest response was to indulge his daughter's every whim. He and Priscilla butted heads over their differences in parenting, Elvis giving the 8-year-old a diamond ring, and Priscilla insisting, "There's no way I will allow her to wear a diamond ring at the age of 8. The child was pulled one way and then the other, so much so that when she went home to her mother in California, she would throw tantrums, screaming, "I want to go back to Graceland." "She was a terror when I got her back," says Priscilla. "You cannot imagine." From the age of 3, Lisa had listened to records in her room instead of playing with other children. But in Tennessee, she had a whole other life. She could eat anything she wanted, squish frogs, spook the security guards at 4 a.m., sign rude autographs at the gate. Fuck you, Lisa Marie Presley. and race around the grounds in her own golf cart, sometimes with playmates Patsy and Peggy Lynn, the twin daughters of country singer Loretta Lynn, who had met Elvis when they were both in the hospital in Memphis. If Elvis wasn't much of a disciplinarian, Joe Cathy Brownlee spent enough time around them to know that he loved it when Lisa was there, and he would get very sad when it was time for her to leave. I can remember him talking to Priscilla on the phone and just begging her to let Lisa stay a couple of more days. And to Mindy Miller, he admitted that Lisa had really softened him and opened him up to being something other than a performer and a man of the world. He said, "I never thought it, but she has turned out to be the love of my life." It was clear to everyone that Lisa idolized her father, and that even at her young age, she realized his power and position in the world. One night before Joe Cathy left, the teacher promised Lisa she would ride the golf cart with her when she returned. But the next afternoon, when Joe Cathy and Elvis were upstairs, Lisa came running up and said, "Daddy, the golf cart has a flat tire." I said, "Oh, Lisa, I'm so sorry. We can't ride the golf cart today." And Lisa said, "JC, my daddy has millions more golf carts." George Klein kept sending girls up to the house, but nobody seemed right, and Elvis asked Joe Smith to check them out. He still liked finger-sucking and toe-sucking, and he'd say, "You know if I'd like her or not. If her fingernails are dirty or if her toenails are dirty, she's a definite out." If the girl passed muster, Joe would say, "Step this way." But then a lot of times, she or Billy would have to sit upstairs with them and talk. Elvis didn't seem interested in much more than companionship, telling his guests, "I need to have all my bodily fluids to heal myself." Billy thought it was wild, but we were expected to say, "Yeah, that's right. He always saves his bodily fluids before a tour." Often, Elvis's little cousin wondered, what the hell does the girl think? But as Joe remembers, the girls would just lay there and smile with their little negligées on. No matter who came around, Elvis couldn't seem to get out of the dumps. In July 1976, Vernon, with Elvis's blessing, fired Red, Sonny, and Dave Hebler over several issues: a lawsuit over the rough handling of a fan, the general friction in the group, and Vernon's ongoing paranoia that Elvis's friends took advantage of him. The three men, especially Red and Sonny, were deeply offended not to hear the word from Elvis himself, and he seemed too paralyzed to pick up the phone. Then, in October 1976, he got word that they were writing a book, one that would expose, among other things, his deep dependence on prescription medication. They were doing it, they insisted, to try to get him to stop, to turn his life around before it was too late. "That was our intention," Sonny says, "whether people believe it or not." The news devastated him. He cried, ranted, and talked of a plan to kill his friends himself and dispose of their bodies. Then, when he calmed down, he had John O'Grady telephone Sonny and offer the three overdue severance pay to cancel the book. O'Grady never named an actual figure, but it didn't matter. "John," Sonny told him, "taking the money would make us just like the doctors who give him the medicine." While Linda agreed that Elvis had handled the firing rather unceremoniously, it was the major turning point, the pivotal current in his decline. Mindy agrees. He couldn't sleep at night. He was very depressed about it, an absolute wreck. He was afraid when the book came out that people would view him differently and find fault with him. He talked about that to no end. "Can you believe Sonny and Red would do this to me? How dare they put me out there? These are lies, the things they're talking about, all these supposed drugs. It's crap." All I could do was sit and listen. I'd say, "E, I'm really sorry." Linda, too, tried her best to comfort him. "Let's just go away and live in a little shack on a farm and forget fame and fortune and all of the craziness that goes with it," she pleaded. "Now, why the hell would I want to do that?" Elvis replied. "I truly, truly loved him, and I wouldn't have cared if he were John Doe. I loved him as a human soul. He was really a wonderful person," Linda says. But after 4.5 years, it was time for her to go. She could only do so much caregiving and putting her life on hold. There was a lot of me that wasn't being fulfilled, and I didn't like feeling like I was just an appendage of someone else. I wanted to do some things on my own and be my own person. Still, she acknowledges, to this day there's a part of my heart that has Elvis written all over it. Exactly who did the leaving is a matter of semantics. Linda logged a few days on the next tour, Elvis's 8th of 1976, but she was already emotionally involved with keyboard player David Briggs, who'd offered a strong shoulder. Elvis had his suspicions and sent Larry Geller to a restaurant where he found the couple enjoying a candlelight dinner at 3 a.m. The band was afraid he was going to shoot me, David remembers. I didn't think he would because he liked me a lot. I didn't think he would let a woman get between us. But Elvis would soon make his feelings clear, pulling the plug on David's electric keyboard one night toward the end of the tour. Linda's affair broke Elvis's heart, says Mindy, because he had already been betrayed by Priscilla, but he never looked at it that he betrayed anybody else. He just said, "She's going out with my damn piano player." On November 19th, 1976, George Klein, hoping to lift Elvis's spirits, brought Terry Alden, the reigning Miss Tennessee, out to the house. Terry was a pretty girl, slim and self-possessed, but she was engaged and came only because she thought it would be fun to meet Elvis and see Graceland. That's one reason she brought along her two sisters, Rosemary and Ginger. Elvis was cordial to Terry and Rosemary and told them he remembered their father, a public relations officer for the Army. But it was 20-year-old Ginger, with dark eyes, sculpted lips, and long auburn hair, that Elvis liked best. How could he not? The current Miss Mid-South Fair and former Miss Traffic Safety looked like Priscilla, Deborah Paget, and Gladys, all rolled into one. 34. Breathe. Ginger. In rock and roll mythology, she is the girl who let him die, knocking the world off its axis. Like his mother, her name sprang from the 7th letter, G. Gladys and Ginger bookending his life. One watched too closely, the other not at all. She was born November 13th, 1956, the very year that Elvis rose to national fame. Ginger couldn't remember a time when he didn't loom large in her consciousness. She got her first glimpse of him at perhaps the age of 3, when her mother, Jo Laverne Alden, an inveterate Elvis fan, took her down to the fabled Graceland gates and excitedly instructed her to peer through the bars. Then, at 5, she met him. One of his uncles invited the Aldens to join them on an outing at the fairgrounds, and Ginger had ridden with Elvis on the Pippin, holding tight on the metal bar as the roller coaster made its death-defying dips and turns. Elvis was so kind and cordial, Rosemary, then 12, remembers. He shook hands with each of us and patted Ginger on the head. Ginger was 5'9" now, far too statuesque for that sort of treatment. But the night the grown-up Ginger met him, Elvis seemed to be in no hurry to see any of the Aldens, and kept them waiting for hours while he practiced karate. Finally, the 3 sisters were led upstairs to meet him, where he received them in Lisa Marie's bedroom. "I know this sounds funny," Ginger admits, "but when Elvis entered the room, I thought trumpets would sound." He entertained them in his usual fashion, taking them on a tour of the house, singing and reading aloud from his favorite books. It turned out to be a truly wonderful evening, Ginger later recalled. By one account, she spent the night, a chaste one. The next evening, Elvis took her up in his plane for what was supposed to be a quick flight to see the Memphis skyline. "Have you ever been west?" Elvis asked her. Ginger shook her youthful head, and suddenly they were on their way to Las Vegas with chaperones Patsy and Gigi Gambill. Though she was 20 years old, Ginger seemed incapable of making a single move without her mother's input. She phoned home for permission, and the couple stayed overnight, returning the next afternoon. 8 days later, Elvis asked her to join his West Coast tour and sent his Jetstar to bring her to San Francisco, where he would play the Cow Palace. But first, there was a minor matter to resolve. Linda had accompanied Elvis to Reno, Nevada, and Eugene and Portland, Oregon, for the opening dates, along with Larry Geller's new wife, Celeste, and sister Judy. While Ginger occupied a room on the floor below the suite, Elvis told Linda she looked as if she weren't feeling well. Maybe she should go back to LA to rest, he said. When Linda replied that she felt just fine, Elvis launched into Plan B and called Larry into his bathroom. He was shaving. "All right, listen," he said, looking into the mirror at the curve of the razor and then glancing over at Larry. "Here's what's happening. You've got to tell Celeste and Judy they can come on tour anytime they want, but I'm sending them back to LA now with Linda on the Jetstar. I've met someone else. She's here now, but don't tell them what's up." Judy thought it was odd, because the next date was Anaheim. Why didn't Elvis wait into LA to send all the women home? It didn't make sense, but she just shrugged her shoulders. You did what the king asked. Elvis, meanwhile, told his girlfriend of 4.5 years that he was flying out to Vegas right after the Anaheim date and that they would meet up there. But Larry knew it would never happen and that the couple was finished. That was the last time he ever saw Linda. In Anaheim, Elvis gave one of his better performances, and Larry, seeing him perk up on stage, told Elvis that Ginger inspired him. She would stay with him the entire 2 weeks of his Vegas engagement that December 1976, though Ginger's charms could not continue to work miracles. Elvis flagged as the nights wore on, hurting his ankle and seeming tired. "I hate Las Vegas," he said out of the blue during one late-night show, baffling the crowd. Everything about him signaled that Elvis was in deep trouble, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. Sandy Farrah, Elvis's little Hollywood pal, went backstage with husband Wink Martindale one evening. "When we left, I commented that Elvis didn't look good at all," Wink says. Priscilla's family, including her parents Paul and Anne Beaulieu, were also in attendance that engagement, and Elvis invited them to his dressing room. He spoke to Michelle, Priscilla's sister, about his hands. He was self-conscious that they were so bloated. I patted his hands as if to reassure him. But Priscilla had noticed them 3 years earlier on the day they met in the judge's chambers and signed the final divorce decree. As they sat with their fingers entwined, seeming more like an old couple than adversaries who were about to be legally parted, Priscilla grew alarmed at how puffy Elvis was. I knew something was different. Something was wrong. I could see it in his eyes. I could feel it in his hands. Now in Vegas, Paul sensed that he didn't want to let us go. He kept thinking of topics that would prolong the conversation. He kept asking us what we needed and wanted. We told him that we were just fine. We had everything we needed. But he insisted that we accept something. Finally, Elvis wrote out a personal check for $10,000 and handed it to Anne. She didn't want to take it, but he seemed to need her to accept it. After the divorce, Elvis had called her and said, "Please speak with Scylla," and begged her to try to convince his ex-wife to come back to him. It was a very sad conversation. I felt how desperately he wanted to keep his family together. Anne knew that her daughter was determined to move on with her life, but she told Elvis that she would do what she could. "Please do," he pleaded. "I want you all to be part of my family." It was like a sword through her. "Elvis," she said, "will always be part of your family." But when they left after his performance that December, I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Priscilla, who the fans blamed for Elvis's deterioration and the breakup of the marriage, knew Elvis held out hope that they would reunite. I'd take Lisa over to his house and he'd say, "Scylla, go do what you have to do now. Go see the world. But when you're 40 and I'm 50, we'll be back together. You'll see." But she would later say that in the last year of his life, we underestimated his emotional pain, and he lacked the means to fully express that pain. Early in that same Vegas engagement, even as Ginger was by his side, Elvis reached for a pad he kept by his bed and scribbled a note that spoke to the core of his emptiness. "I feel so alone sometimes. The night is quiet for me. I'd love to be able to sleep. I am glad that everyone is gone now. I'll probably not rest. I have no need for all this."
Help me, Lord.
Later, he crumpled it up and threw it in the waste can, where someone, one of the guys, a maid, retrieved it. It was remarkably similar to another desperate note he wrote in the Hilton suite.
I don't know who I can talk to anymore, or turn to. I only have myself and the Lord. Help me, Lord, to know the right thing.
The pattern of both notes would later fuel rumors that Elvis had contemplated suicide. Though some believe they are forgeries, or fakes, Priscilla included them in her family memoir, Elvis by the Presleys, an indication she believes they are authentic. According to Larry, Linda sent letters to Vegas, but Elvis refused to read them or take her calls. If she hadn't immediately been wise to the situation in San Francisco, she soon learned from her brother Sam, who had quit his job with the Memphis Sheriff's Department earlier that year to work tour security after Red and Sonny's dismissal. As a favor to Linda, Elvis had recently helped Sam and his wife Louise buy a house. When the group arrived in Vegas, Elvis took him aside.
Sam, Elvis said, I love your sister, but I am not in love with her, and I've found someone else. I just want you to know that it's not going to affect your job. I respect what you do, and if you want to work for me, you have a position.
Sam elected to stay. Ginger, meanwhile, was learning what every other woman in Elvis's life already knew, that being on the road and staying cooped up in Vegas was not the heady trip that it appeared. Once the glamour wore off, Ginger was homesick for her mother and her sisters, and Elvis learned she missed a young man she had been seeing in Memphis. Shirley and Joe were in their bedroom in the Imperial Suite one day when Elvis and Ginger appeared at the door. Shirley could see that Elvis was upset, that he seemed frustrated and adrift. She rarely saw him like that and asked what was the matter. Elvis found out that Ginger had a boyfriend, so he told her to call him and tell him that it was over and she wouldn't do it. She kept saying no. He and Ginger exchanged heated words, and then in anger, Elvis picked up a glass of orange juice and threw it across the room. Shirley had just taken the plastic off her dry cleaning, and now it was covered with sticky pulp. Oh, I was so mad, but he felt bad about it, I could tell. It was sad. Linda had taken off with David Briggs, and he wanted to show her that he could get someone who was prettier and younger. Shirley thought Elvis seemed all too desperate to make the romance bloom, while others in the group accused him of keeping Ginger a virtual hostage. On December 10th, because she had complained she needed to go home to see her family, Elvis flew Ginger's parents, sisters, and her brother and his wife to Vegas. That same day, the Memphis Commercial Appeal quoted Joe Alden as saying that Elvis had given Ginger a Lincoln Continental, though she doesn't think it was an engagement gift. The strain of their relationship only added to Elvis's lackluster performance and ill health. 2 days later, Bill E. Burke of the Memphis Press-Scimitar boldly wrote, "One walks away wondering how much longer it can be before the end comes." That night, Elvis met with evangelist Rex Humbard in his dressing room, and in telling the preacher he felt his life lacked all meaning, Elvis wept. After a 2-week rest, however, he was more like himself and gave a well-received 90-minute concert on New Year's Eve in Pittsburgh. He seemed to be in high spirits, in part because he had both his girls there, Ginger and Lisa. Ginger sat in a chair near the stage and held up the squirmy 8-year-old so she could have a better view of the performance. Clearly, Ginger's family encouraged the relationship. When her parents' often troubled marriage appeared to be over, Elvis met with them to see if they could reconcile, but then offered to pay for their divorce and buy Joe a new house. More and more, there seemed to be nothing Elvis wouldn't do to win Ginger's affections. He went to her grandfather's funeral in Arkansas on January 3, 1977, flying her family to Harrison, Arkansas, and then accompanying Ginger on the 20-mile drive to Jasper for services in a tiny rural church. Afterward, he, Ginger, and Rosemary flew to Palm Springs for Elvis's 42nd birthday on January 8th. He was more impetuous in all manners of love now. On January 9th, he spurred his dentist, Mac Shapiro, to marry his young fiancée, Suzanne, in Palm Springs that very day, waking Larry in the middle of the night to come perform the ceremony. Larry, who was licensed to marry couples in the state of California, but had never actually done it, nervously grabbed a couple of candles, some incense, and his Bible, and ran for the flight. Elvis bought the rings, and Ginger stood in as maid of honor.
When Elvis met Ginger, Larry observed, something came over this guy. Part of it was beautiful because he just so desperately wanted a real relationship. The next morning he said to me, "Man, I can't believe this girl. I look at that woman's eyes and it's my mother's eyes." So for the first month, he was really just nuts over Ginger. But to me, it was unrealistic. It was an improbable pairing to others, too. Ginger was a sweet person, but her personality was monochromatic. Like Deborah Paget and Priscilla before her, she hardly ever said a word, which intrigued Elvis all the more. Whether she was petrified or a blank slate, as Shirley believes, the girl was a mystery. Not only that, but aside from the fact that she already had a boyfriend, she didn't seem to really care for Elvis. Ginger would later say that wasn't true, that she loved him deeply, even if others insisted she rarely seemed affectionate toward him. In Vegas, out of the corner of her eye, Shirley had caught him taking Ginger's hand and putting it between his shoulder and neck. Then he placed his own hand on top of hers and patted it. "See, Shirley," he said, "she loves me just like you love Joe." It broke Shirley's heart, but it also worried everyone as to how far Elvis might go. Nothing about his involvement with Ginger indicated rational thinking. In Palm Springs, especially, Elvis seemed to have almost no control over his impulses. After Larry winged the ceremony and pronounced the Shapiros man and wife, Elvis signed the certificate and then hurriedly turned to his friend. "Lawrence, come with me right away," he implored. "Ginger, you too." He took them into his bedroom, where Larry chose a chair and Elvis and Ginger sat on the edge of the bed. "Ginger," Elvis began, "I know we haven't talked about this, but that was the most beautiful ceremony I've ever seen in my life. That's what a real marriage ceremony should be. This is what I want us to have. What do you say?"
Larry couldn't believe his ears. Ginger, too, seemed astonished.
She very, very demurely said, "Yeah, yes." Elvis looked at me and said, "You can't tell anyone about this yet. We are going to do this later in the year. We'll do it at Graceland." But in my heart of hearts, I knew there was no way this was going to happen. He was riding a wave of euphoria, and all of the stardust was going to blow away, and he was going to realize that she was too young and not for him.
Ginger was a symbol, Larry thought, someone against whom Elvis could project his dreams in relation to what was going on in his life at the time. His health problems, his waning youth, his father's second heart attack in December, his conflicts with Colonel Parker, everything. She had a ring, though, that was true. On January 26, 1977, Elvis came to her and proposed, she said. It was like old-fashioned times. He was on his knees. He asked me to marry him, and I said yes. She was sitting in his black reading chair in the upstairs bathroom at Graceland, and he pulled out a green velvet box and produced a stunning 11.5-carat diamond worth $70,000. He was in such a hurry for it, in fact, that jeweler Lowell Hayes took the stone from Elvis's own TCB ring until he could find a replacement. Ginger was now the second woman to whom Elvis had proposed in a bathroom. Her mother was overjoyed. "When he flew my family to Las Vegas," Jo Alden says, her voice full of tulle and lace, "he told me he had loved people, but he had never been in love before. He said that when he found Ginger, he found what he had been searching for, and that he knew God had led him to her." In Mrs. Alden's version of the story, both Elvis and Vernon were so taken with Ginger that they saw her as nearly a celestial being. His father told him that Ginger was an angel sent from heaven. In fact, Elvis wanted to say that to Ginger, but as he told me, "How do you go about telling an angel that?" However, Elvis didn't seem like a man who was planning a future with a new bride, angel or not. Elvis was a witness to the signing of his last will and testament in early March 1977, and yet the document excluded her. Shirley believes she knows how the confusion arose, because Ginger sought her advice at the time. Ginger and I were sitting next to each other on the bus, and she said, "Elvis asked me to marry him, but I think he changed his mind, because he hasn't mentioned it anymore. It's like he never said it." "Listen, if he talked about marriage, you better jump on it," Shirley told her. "If he hasn't talked about it, he's probably already forgotten it." Ginger pressed her for more. "Do you think he really meant it?" "I don't know, Ginger." Rosemary Alden shares her mother's gauzy view and insists that Elvis made his intentions clear to all the Aldens. "My most treasured moment with Elvis occurred when he told our family that he was going to marry Ginger, how happy she made him, and how much he loved us as a family while he placed our TLC necklaces around each of our necks." Yet Joe Esposito has a more studied opinion. "Elvis liked Ginger very much, but I don't think he was going to marry her. He may have told her that he wanted to marry her so she would stay around, but after a while he started to date other women too." Billy Smith echoes Joe's observation, saying Elvis kept buying Ginger jewelry and cars, 3 in all, to keep her there. And he shares the belief that Elvis was not going to marry her, no matter what he said to Ginger or her family. "We even took her out window shopping for wedding dresses once, about midnight. We'd drive by a store and Elvis would say, 'Hey, there's one,' and he would describe what he wanted Ginger to wear on her head, that thing that stands up that Spanish women wear, and he wanted a long train on her dress. And Ginger believed all this. But he'd also say, 'Yeah, and when we get married,' and then turn to Joe and me and say real low, 'Whenever that is.'" Today, Shirley's opinion is that Elvis was on sleeping pills when he gave Ginger the ring, and probably meant the proposal at the time. As to whether they were actually engaged, it depends on how you look at it, but there definitely wouldn't have been a wedding. There's no way there would have been a wedding. It was just naivete on Ginger's part. Besides, Shirley says, since Ginger refused to call things off with her old boyfriend, it sounds to me like she didn't exactly plan on getting married to EP either, you know? Eventually, Elvis would come to call the Aldens leeches, according to David Stanley, Elvis's stepbrother. He felt that Ginger was just using him. She didn't love him, that was obvious. But Shirley is more sympathetic. She was just a young, stupid girl who didn't want to be there. It wasn't even her fault. Her mom had her claws into Elvis and her hand in his back pocket. Everybody knows that. Ginger was her little pawn. Sometime that spring, 1977, Elvis put in a call to Anne Pennington. He had often told her that he thought he would die before he reached his mother's age, and perhaps because he was about to sign his will, he seemed to have the end on his mind. "I want you to know I had the most fun with you than I did with anybody," he told her. "You really liked me for who I am, and you never took anything from me." Right after the signing of the will, Elvis took a gang of 30 to Hawaii, first checking into the Hilton Rainbow Tower, and then, after 2 days, moving with the Alden sisters and others to a beach house at Kailua. In the many pictures that Joe and Shirley took of him there, he looks happy, laughing, playing football, and teasing Shirley, putting his tongue in her ear. Elvis made dreams come true for so many people, and I do think he had a nice time, she says. He was so much fun to play with, and it was wonderful. However, one day he got sand in his eye and scratched his cornea. After that, he cut the trip short, but not before promising Larry that he was going to make big changes in his life, about his health and diet, about cutting the dead wood from his organization, even about firing the colonel and getting off of pills. He was so determined, and he had so many plans. But then he ran into Sherry Williams, and when she asked about all the old group, he let his guard down. "Baby," he said, "they wrote a book." And his voice cracked on the words. "I know," she answered. Then he looked out over the ocean, and he had such a faraway gaze that nothing more needed to be said. When they returned to Memphis the 3rd week of March, Ginger refused to accompany Elvis on tour. She had also begged off going to Nashville with him to record in January, when he mostly sat in his hotel room, dialing her number and leaving town without recording a note. Now Billy could barely rouse him from bed. Dr. Nick put Elvis on an IV and recognized that Ginger was an emotional factor in his malaise. But again, he rallied. As he stepped out on stage in Tempe, Arizona on March 23rd, his first night of the tour, he whispered to Billy, "You didn't think I'd make it, did you?" Billy couldn't believe what a hell of a show he put on and marveled at where he found the energy. Yet, when the group reached Baton Rouge, Louisiana on March 31st, Elvis was unable to go on and canceled the performance, as well as the last 3 sold-out shows of the tour in Mobile, Alabama, Macon, Georgia, and Jacksonville, Florida. Back home in Memphis, Elvis checked into Baptist Memorial Hospital on April 1st. When Dr. Nick discharged him 4 days later, Priscilla and Lisa Marie flew in to be with him. Bill Hance of the Nashville Banner had written, "The singer's new girlfriend is absolutely running him ragged." Elvis's ex-wife could see it was true. For the last 6 months, he was really preoccupied with trying to make a go with this relationship. Dr. Nick says he was very protective of her and would really treat her like a child. I felt if we could work things out with Ginger, that we'd be 70 to 80% ahead of the game and getting other things accomplished. But Ginger didn't seem all that keen on moving ahead with any of Elvis's plans. She wouldn't move into Graceland, claiming it was immoral. She didn't like to spend the night, and she certainly didn't appear to be overly fond of making love with her fiancé. Elvis complained to Shirley that Ginger was always in her menses. He said, "That damn girl's going to bleed to death." "Why the hell do you put up with her?" Billy Smith asked his cousin. "Because," Elvis answered wearily, "I'm just getting too old and tired to train another one." Billy was almost as frustrated with the situation as Elvis. He and the guys had to chase her down half the time, and they'd even followed her once. If Elvis had ever known that, God, he'd have fired all of us, but she was in a nightclub dancing with a guy. Elvis's pet name for Ginger was Gingerbread, but Billy was so ticked off at her that he began referring to her as Ginger Snatch. Sometimes she wouldn't come up for a few days, and Elvis would get all agitated and sullen and say, "Where is she, man? Why don't she stay here?" And when she did come, she'd get up and go home after Elvis went to sleep. The night she refused to go to Nashville for Elvis's recording session, he followed her out of Graceland and fired a pistol over her head several times, but still it didn't stop her. Eventually, Elvis resorted to more childish methods, letting the air out of her tires, and once instructing Billy, "Keep the gate closed, don't let her out." I said, "God damn, Elvis, open the gate and let the girl go home, man. This is not a prison." I was mad and fed up with it. One night, God, they were into it. She hadn't been up there in 2 or 3 days, and he was trying to keep her from leaving. Finally, she got to go home, and Elvis asked me, "What do you think about Ginger? Do you think I should find somebody else?" I said, "I think she's everything in a woman that you always hated." He stayed mad at me for 3 days. In April, after another fight with Ginger, Elvis had a new girl at the house, 20-year-old bank teller Alicia Kerwin, who received her introduction through George Klein. Alicia, ebony-haired, vibrant, and fresh-faced, had never been a fan, and knew nothing about Elvis other than the fact that he had a daughter. Their first meeting, about 10 p.m. upstairs at Graceland, lasted about 2 hours. The room was full of people, though the only one she recognized was Charlie Hodge. They were fixin' to go on tour, so it was hectic, very hectic, and we just talked. When she and Elvis next met, in Lisa Marie's bedroom while stylist Aurelia Dumont was cutting Elvis's hair, Rosemary Alden walked in. She was real inquisitive and very rude, and she wanted to know who I was and what I was doing there. Rosemary was just being a female, as Alicia put it, but it made her feel strange, and the following day Elvis called and invited her back. I said no, I had a date. He thought I should break it. When she refused, he hung up on her, and then, 2 seconds later, he calls back and he says, "Well, what about tomorrow?" He also asked her if she could get a few days off from work. On April 13th, Alicia accompanied Elvis and Billy and Joe to Las Vegas on a drug run to Dr. Ghanem. Afterward, they went on to Palm Springs. Elvis was in good spirits and bought Alicia a Cadillac, but then, as she remembered, he got a reprimand from his father on the telephone because he'd told neither Vernon nor the Colonel where he was going. They had been looking for him for 3 days and couldn't find him, so everybody was upset, and in turn, he got them upset. He was being scolded. Elvis's way of dealing with it was to load up on Placidils and muscle relaxers, and when Alicia woke up and thought he wasn't breathing, she quickly summoned the Smiths. Even Billy was alarmed.
"It scared me real bad, 'cause you couldn't have stirred him with a stick."
For the second time, Dr. Kaplan came and revived him, and Elias Ghanem flew in to take care of him. Alicia was shaken, and when she later thought Elvis had hemorrhaged, he only fell asleep with red jello in his mouth. She couldn't take it anymore, and began to distance herself from him. Still, he would call her from the road. On one of her final visits to Graceland, she dropped by after attending a family dinner party for her sister's birthday, and found him in a gloomy mood. He wished he could go out on Saturday night like everybody else, and he couldn't. He was just depressed about it. He liked you to tell him about places that you'd been, a club you'd go to. He liked you to describe in detail what it's like to walk in there and have nobody really know you. We just talked, and then I went home about 3 o'clock in the morning. That June, she cut it off. It was just too much for a young kid, she said. Just the idea of Elvis Presley. Too much, too fast, way too much to handle. The last time she saw him, she went over about 4 a.m. and stayed until she went to work. He looked sad. I read to him for a long time till he went to sleep. The pretty young bank teller would later sob in saying that she and Elvis had never been intimate, especially as he was enmeshed in his troubles with Ginger. She came over once, and he wouldn't see her, so she left. She called a lot when she'd know I was there. She would ring the phone off the hook. Alicia could tell that Elvis cared about Ginger, but he told her he felt like she was more or less after his money than anything else. Alicia, who had attended Memphis State, was a sweet and unsophisticated young woman with a set of impish dimples. From her high school picture, she seemed destined for little more than a future as a suburban wife and mother. But she had found her first trip to Vegas exhilarating, and after that, West Tennessee proved too dull for her. The pull of the neon soon claimed her, as she would move to the desert, become a blackjack dealer, and get caught up in a lifestyle she could never have imagined, eventually dying of multiple drug toxicity, combining 3 of the drugs, Valium, Placidil, and Alavil, that made her recoil from Elvis. Yet in the next 2 months, before any of that happened, Elvis would attempt to keep Alicia on the string. He planned to ask her to go on the August tour if Ginger backed out. In the meantime, another young bank teller, Debbie Watts, took Alicia's place. But Debbie, who also learned bad habits from Elvis, she would later go to prison for dealing methamphetamine, was merely a passing fancy. It was still Ginger Elvis wanted. At a stage when he could no longer summon beautiful young actresses, she was as close as he could get, and her refusal to cater to his whims only deepened his anxiety about aging. When he went out on tour the 3rd week of April, Ginger accompanied him, but it was obvious she tired of the schedule and that she wanted to go home. On August 29th, when he played Duluth, Minnesota, he flew in her mother and sister, Rosemary, to keep her happy. His frustrations mounted, and everywhere he looked, someone he loved had his hand out. At the end of April, Elvis issued Priscilla a deed of trust to Graceland for $494,024.49, the amount still owed to her in the divorce settlement. In May, Dr. Nick, Joe Esposito, and an entrepreneur named Mike McMahon sued him over his failure to fund a racquetball franchise, Presley Center Courts, to which he believed he was only lending his name. Though the matter would soon be resolved, it threw him into deeper despair. That same month, he shot out his bedroom window at Graceland and spent most of 2.5 weeks sequestered upstairs. Meanwhile, his health continued to plummet. On May 20th, when he went back out on tour, his 4th of the year, he was so bloated he had to wear the same jumpsuit, another white one with a gold Aztec calendar design, for 13 days straight. Backstage in Knoxville on the first night, a doctor reported he was pale, swollen, he had no stamina. His mood was dark and despondent. Around this time, he told Jerry Schilling that he felt so bad and was so beleaguered with health problems that, "I can't wait for 1977 to be over." Larry Geller wondered why nobody at the top was trying to help him. "You could look at Elvis and see that there was a problem. I used to go to my room and literally cry. I couldn't handle it." Priscilla has said that after the divorce, she was so busy with Lisa Marie and building their new life that she didn't realize what dreadful shape Elvis was in. Maybe nobody wanted to face what was really happening, she admits. But certainly the Colonel had to see it every night. Why hadn't he done anything? On May 21st, in Louisville, Larry gleaned a better understanding. At the hotel, Elvis was barely able to sit up in bed that afternoon, and Larry noticed it took him more and more time to get ready for the show each night. About 4 o'clock, as Dr. Nick administered the drugs that would transform him from a sick and addled man to an energized performer, Larry watched television in the anteroom of the suite. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. Larry jumped, it startled him, and then answered it to find the Colonel, his face twisted in anger, his wobbly body leaning on his cane. Larry was astonished. He'd never known the Colonel to come to Elvis's room on tour. "Where is he?" Parker thundered. Larry said he would let Elvis know he was there. "No," the Colonel said curtly, brushing Geller as he passed. "I'm going in." Parker opened the door to a devastating sight. Elvis, in a collapsed state, comatose, not even truly conscious, and moaning. Dr. Nick worked frantically to revive him, kneeling at his bedside, ducking the singer's head into a champagne bucket filled with ice water. Parker slammed the door behind him. For a moment, Larry's heart raced. Then he felt relieved. Finally, the Colonel had seen Elvis at his worst. Surely now he would pull him off the road, take steps to get him help. Yet 90 seconds later, the manager roared out, "You listen to me!" Parker shouted at Larry, slicing the air with his cane. "The only thing that's important is that he's on that stage tonight. Nothing else matters." And then he was gone. Larry stood in shock, horrified. I thought, oh my God, why didn't he wait for Elvis to come to and say, "Son, I'm taking over now. You are in no shape. We've got to get you to a hospital right now." I can only surmise he acted out of stupidity and denial. But still, how could he be so callous? Where was his humanity? Through the years, fans have blamed Priscilla for not staging an intervention. How could she just stand by and watch Elvis kill himself? "People who ask that don't know Elvis," she has written. Elvis would no more have responded to an intervention than a demand to give up singing. He never considered himself a drug addict. He refused to believe he had a problem. He would have undoubtedly laughed away any attempt at an intervention. There's no one, including his father, who could have pulled that off. By now, audiences braced themselves for the worst. On May 22nd, in Landover, Maryland, Elvis walked off stage, tossing 2 microphones to the floor, and announcing he needed to answer nature's call. "God went to the toilet," said Jackie Kahane. Incredible. Soon, in Baltimore, he would fall on stage and then again disappear for half an hour. At the finale, Variety wrote, there was no ovation, and patrons exited shaking their heads and speculating on what was wrong with him. One thing, of course, was Ginger. On May 26th, in Binghamton, New York, they quarreled, as they often did on tour, and he sent her home, telling Larry she was still in communication with her ex-boyfriend, and that she also couldn't seem to cut the apron strings. He said, "I've got to teach her. When we get back after the concert, all she wants to do is get on the phone and talk to her mother. I want her with me." He started to have second and third thoughts about her. That afternoon, he came out of the bedroom with Dr. Nick, and told the guys sitting around the suite's living room that he and Ginger needed a rest from each other, and that while she was young, if she didn't grow up and choose between him and her whole damn family, there definitely would be no wedding. Kathy Westmoreland was summoned to stay with him the rest of the tour so he could fall asleep at night and not feel so isolated and alone. But the backup singer, who had always considered Elvis a long-lost soul I had missed and found, was so worried about him she could hardly sleep herself. Increasingly, he talked of death. One night, he showed her a blue jumpsuit hanging on the wall. He was going to have to wear it, and he said, "I'm going to look fat in that faggy little suit, but I'll look good in my coffin." Suddenly, Kathy was unable to utter a word. I knew that it was inevitable and could come at any moment. He told me that he didn't want me to wear black at the funeral, but white. In midsummer, on what was to be his final tour, CBS TV shot a 1-hour special, Elvis in Concert, in Omaha, Nebraska, on June 19th, and in Rapid City, South Dakota 2 days later. Ginger once again accompanied him, and on one of the nights he playfully introduced her to the crowd. "I'd like you to say hello to my girlfriend, Ginger. Ginger, stand up, honey." She stood briefly to applause. "Sit down, Ginger. That's enough for her." The controversial special, which aired after Elvis's death, and in the opinion of many around Elvis, should never have been broadcast at all, revealed a legend colliding with myth. All cartoonish chins, gut, and hair, Elvis was often short of breath as he stumbled through his lyrics. "Are you lonesome tonight?" slurred his speech and perspired like a man on fire. Embarrassed, he poked fun of himself, and while many fans could hardly believe the sad specter that had been their hero, at times, especially on How Great Thou Art and Hurt, he was still able to evoke glimmers of greatness. At the beginning of Elvis in Concert, Todd Slaughter, president of the official Elvis Presley fan club of Great Britain, later said, "You see a very shaky Elvis maneuver his way down the steps of a plane. And then, cut. CBS left out the rest of the scene. I was at the end of the steps, being kept back by Colonel Parker, who eventually thrust me forward. What I remember most is the abrupt manner in which he prodded Elvis with his walking stick and said, 'You give this award to him.' I could tell Elvis was very ill. His eyes were bloodshot, his lip was bleeding, and it looked as if he couldn't see too well." His last night of the tour fell on June 26th, the Colonel's birthday, in Indianapolis, where he again wore the Aztec suit, as he had the night before in Cincinnati. He was weary, though upbeat, and afterward on the plane, before the group broke up and went their separate ways, Elvis began giving out gifts, as was his custom at the end of a tour. Shirley, so thin as to appear almost anorexic, was surprised when he handed her $750. "What's this?" she asked. "Go buy yourself some chocolate shakes. You're too darn skinny." She wrapped her small arms around him and held him tight. "Oh, Elvis," she said, "I love you." "I love you too," he answered, "and I know how much you love Joe." Then he gave her a kiss. He was to have 6 weeks off before the next flurry of shows, and while everyone was glad to have the rest, they threw around the casual banter of what they'd do in the interim before they all gathered again for the end-of-summer tour. Elvis had performances booked through August, and the general assumption was that he would work right up until the end of the year. Lamar Fike, who worked the road with the Colonel advancing the dates, knew better. "We were on the airplane, on the ground, and Elvis walked off to accept a plaque from RCA. He was so tired. I said, 'Boys, I'm going to give you one of my great speeches. He'll never see the snow fly, I promise you.'" Priscilla had her last conversation with him late in the summer. They talked frequently, as he conferred with her on almost everything, from what color to paint the Lisa Marie to the size of his belt buckle. I did say to him, "You really shouldn't be wearing those jumpsuits anymore. It's not looking good." Elvis never seemed to have any sense of time, calling her at midnight or 2 a.m. in California, saying he had a song for her to hear, or a new book he wanted her to read. She complained about the middle-of-the-night calls, but she never refused a visit. She knew he was lonely and needed company. During their final call, it was wildly apparent how different their lives were now. She was about to go on a safari in New Guinea, while Elvis could barely conceive of such an adventure, let alone allow himself to enjoy one. The high point of their conversation was Lisa Marie's upcoming visit to Memphis, which was to start July 31st. But Elvis spoke obsessively to Priscilla about Red, Sonny, and Dave Hebler's book, Elvis, What Happened, which was scheduled to be published on August 4th. Elvis feared it would be the end of him as a performer, he said. He told me he was thinking of changing fields, becoming a movie or record producer. I don't know if he really would have done it. He was always such a fantasizer, but he was grasping for something. 2 weeks before Lisa Marie arrived, Elvis did his best to corral Ginger, who continued to come and go. On July 13th, he gave her a Triumph sports car, and on August 6th, he made a trip to the home of her mother. There, he sang hymns and some of the old songs at the piano. But his real reason for going was to check out the progress of the landscaping of her home and the installment of a swimming pool, which he had agreed to finance, as well as pay off Joe's mortgage. Then, in the early hours of August 8th, he rented out Libertyland, the renamed fairgrounds, as a treat for Lisa Marie and Ginger's niece, Amber. Without the old group, the fairgrounds held little allure for him anymore. He started to back out at one point, but Ginger convinced him the kids would be too disappointed. He was due to start touring again August 17th, and he made the most of his last days of leisure, screening movies and spending time with Lisa. He had his own chair in her bedroom, where he'd sit, watch her TV, and smoke cigars. She was 9 now, old enough to recognize that things were not all right with her daddy. When I stayed at Graceland, I could see he was struggling. I could feel that he was very sad. He'd come into my room walking so unsteadily that sometimes he'd start to fall, and I'd have to catch him. As the hours dwindled down, he got on the phone with Kathy Westmoreland. "I'm so tired," he told her. "I don't want to go on this trip." But he had to, he said. "The Colonel owes $8 million. On the evening of August 15th, 1977, Elvis slipped out of his blue nylon lounging pajamas and, with Billy's help, changed into a white silk shirt, a black sweatsuit, which boasted a drug enforcement agency patch on the jacket, and a pair of short black patent boots. He reached down to zip up the sides and found that he couldn't. His ankles were too puffy. At 10:30 p.m., after a night of motorcycle riding, Elvis stuffed 2 .45 automatic pistols in the waistband of his pants. Then he donned his blue-tinted chrome sunglasses and slid behind the wheel of the Stutz. With Ginger beside him and Billy and Joe in the back seat, Elvis steered his way to the East Memphis office of his dentist, Lester Hoffman. A crown on Elvis's back tooth seemed loose, and he wanted to tend to it before he left the next evening for Portland, Maine, the first stop of his 12-day tour. Around midnight, when the foursome returned to Graceland, Elvis and Ginger went upstairs, and the Smiths retired to their trailer. By now, Elvis had managed to gear himself up, and sometime around 2 a.m. he spoke with Larry, who reported he was in a very good mood, looking forward to the tour and making plans for the future. Ginger would later echo that. He had earlier told me that he had been off too long, and report that after they returned from the dentist, they sat in Lisa Marie's bedroom, where they had met the previous November. They discussed their wedding then, planning a Christmas ceremony, and Elvis promised he would announce the engagement at his August 27th concert in Memphis. He and Ginger had wonderful plans, her mother would say. Around 4 a.m., Elvis went looking for Lisa, who was supposed to be asleep. He found me, she remembers, and said, "Go to bed." I said, "Okay," and I think he kissed me goodnight, and I ran off. Later, he went in her room to tuck her in and kissed her again. Afterward, he still felt frisky enough for a game of racquetball and phoned Billy and Joe to join him and Ginger. As they went out the back door and down the concrete walkway to the racquetball building, a light rain began to slicken their path.
"Ain't no problem. I'll take care of it," Elvis said, and put out his hands as if to stop it.
Amazingly, Billy says, the rain let up.
"See, I told you," Elvis boasted. "If you've got a little faith, you can stop the rain."
Out on the court, they'd barely gotten into it when Elvis found he didn't have as much energy as he'd thought. He'd been on a Jell-O and liquid protein diet for several days, the latest in a series of desperate attempts to fit into his stage costumes, and he'd had no real food in the last 24 hours. The couples cut up more than they concentrated on their game, and mostly swatted each other with the ball. After 10 minutes, they took a break, then returned to the court, but they quit for good when Elvis misjudged a serve and hit himself hard in the shin with his racket. He limped into the lounge then, Billy teasing him, and fixed himself a glass of ice water. Then he moved to the piano and began singing softly, ending with "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain." Ginger estimates it was about 6 a.m. when they went upstairs in the house, where Billy washed and dried his cousin's hair. Elvis was particular about who saw it up close, as his hair was now as white as his father's, and according to Larry, half an inch of growth poked out from under his last color job. As they talked, Elvis returned to his constant fixation. Elvis, what happened? First, he yelled wildly about the betrayal of his friends, how good he'd been to their families, and how they'd now hurt his own. Then his mood dampened, and he rehearsed a speech he planned to give from the stage if his fans turned on him in concert. "They've never beat me before," he said, "and they won't beat me now." Billy knew what he meant. Even if I have to get up there and admit to everything. Now he cried pitifully, shaking. Billy petted him, cooed baby talk to him. "It's okay," Billy soothed. "It's going to be all right." As Billy went out the door, Elvis collected himself again. "Billy, son, this is going to be my best tour ever." At 7:45 a.m., Rick Stanley brought Elvis his second attack, or yellow envelope of sleeping pills. He had already brought the first about 6:30 as the sun rose. 4 hours earlier, Elvis sent his 23-year-old stepbrother to Baptist Memorial Hospital's 24-hour pharmacy to pick up 6 Dilaudid tablets. Dr. Nick had prescribed them after Elvis complained of tooth pain. Dr. Hoffman, the dentist, had given him codeine, Elvis said, but it wasn't helping him. At some point, Pauline Nicholson, a cook and maid at Graceland for 14 years, asked Elvis if he wanted anything to eat, but he declined, saying he wasn't hungry. Rick found Elvis holding the bodyguard book, and once again, Elvis was in a state of agitation. "How was Lisa Marie gonna feel about her daddy?" he blurted out, his voice heightened, full of despair. He asked Rick to pray with him, and together they got down on their knees. "God, forgive me for my sins," Elvis pleaded. "Let the people who read this book have compassion and understanding of the things that I have done. Amen." Rick would later say that after he and Elvis prayed together, he went downstairs and got high, zoning out. That left 53-year-old Aunt Delta to deliver the third packet around 9 a.m. and to call over for more medication when Elvis complained he couldn't settle down. Nurse Tish Henley reportedly sent over 2 Valmids and a Placidil placebo. Sometime around 8 a.m., Elvis climbed in bed with Ginger, who hated seeing her aging boyfriend once more under the influence. Over time, though, she had come to realize that the core problem Elvis had was what most of us take for granted, the ability to simply lie down, close our eyes, and go to sleep at night. Dr. Nick, knowing that Elvis could rest only 2 or 3 hours before he'd pop up wide awake, had tried to get him to go to a sleep clinic in Arkansas, but his patient had refused and asked instead for more sedatives. Joe Esposito thought Ginger didn't know Elvis that well. She saw him in a period of time when he was drugged out, and certainly she was in no position to stage an intervention. Such confrontations were not commonly done outside the medical community in the late 1970s, and Elvis had already rebuffed Doctors Knott and Fink. But Ginger often questioned Elvis's medication use, she would say later, and tried to get him to not take the packets that Dr. Nick prescribed and Tish Henley doled out like clockwork. It was, in fact, the reason for some of their arguments. Although I asked him to try not to use the medication that I thought he did not need, and there were times that he didn't, I truly believed that in time I would be able to convince him. However, on the morning of August 16th, Ginger had no opportunity to reason with him because she was heavily medicated herself. She had menstrual cramps, and about 6:30 Elvis had called Tish Henley and asked her to bring up something so Ginger could sleep. The beauty queen would later say she took Quaalude tablets, but the nurse, who kept her drugs in an overnight bag under lock and key in her trailer, would insist she sent up one dilaudid pill, though the opiate was far more powerful than anything Ginger could have needed for menstrual pain. Whichever drug it was, Ginger was unused to taking it, and it plunged her into a deep sleep. Still, she roused when Elvis came to bed, and then again about 9:30 when Elvis got up, too keyed up to sleep, and preoccupied with the tour and the fan reaction to the Bodyguard book.
"Precious," he said. "I'm going to go in the bathroom and read for a while."
"Okay," she murmured, "but don't fall asleep."
"Don't worry," he called back. "I won't."
Behind the bathroom door, Elvis paged through a book. But it was not the scientific search for the face of Jesus, as is usually reported, but either a slim volume of pornography, a combination of sex and astrology with graphic drawings, as one investigator described it, or, as Ginger remembers, the more high-minded Sex and Psychic Energy by Betty Bethards. Then he waited for the pills to take effect, at some point calling Marion Cock to say he had 4 tickets for her for his August 27th show. As Elvis's day was winding down in Memphis, the Colonel's was already well along in Portland. At the Dunphy Sheraton, Parker held court to oversee every detail of Elvis's 2-day engagement, and barked orders at promoter Tom Hewlett, Lamar Fike, RCA's George Parkhill, and Tom Diskin. Things were still quiet at Graceland, and just before noon, Billy walked over to the house and spoke with Al Strada, who was packing Elvis's wardrobe cases. Billy asked if anyone had seen the boss. Al said no, that Elvis had left orders with David Stanley that he wasn't to be awakened until 4 p.m. under any circumstances. Billy knew that Ginger didn't watch Elvis like Linda did, and wondered aloud if anyone had checked on him. For a moment, he started up the stairs. No, he thought, if they ain't heard from him, God let him rest. He needs it. Finally, at 2:20 p.m., Ginger turned over in Elvis's huge bed and found it empty. Had he never come back to sleep? She noticed his reading light was still on and thought it peculiar. Ginger knocked on the bathroom door. "Elvis?" There was no answer, and so she turned the knob. "That's when I saw him in there," she said days later. Elvis was slumped on the floor, angled slightly to the right. He was on his knees, his hands beneath his face, in a near praying position, his pajama bottoms bunched at his feet. Elvis had seemed to fall off the toilet. But why was he twisted into such a grotesque form? And why hadn't he answered? He laid so still, so unnaturally still. Now Ginger bent down to touch him. He was cold, his swollen face buried in the red shag carpet, his tongue nearly bitten in half, protruding from clenched teeth. His beautiful skin now mottled purple-black. Elvis's death had not been quick, nor had it been painless. But if Elvis had called out, Ginger likely would not have heard him, so deep was her drugged sleep. At first, she thought he was just unconscious, that he had suffered a seizure of some kind and had fallen. I slapped him a few times, and it was like he breathed once when I turned his head. She forced open a shuttered eye. A cloudy blue pupil stared at things that Ginger could not see. She tried to move him and could not. Ginger was in a state of shock and tried to stave off thoughts of the worst. I didn't want to think he was dead. God wouldn't want to take him so soon. And so she threw off thoughts of the obvious. Elvis Presley had died of polypharmacy in the bathroom at Graceland at the age of 42. Now a frightened Ginger picked up the phone, which rang in the kitchen. Nancy Rooks, the afternoon maid, took the call. Breathless, Ginger asked, "Who's on duty?" "Al is here," Nancy answered, and passed the phone to the bodyguard. "Al, come upstairs," Ginger cried. "I need you. Elvis has fainted." Al rushed upstairs, took one look, and with fear in his voice called down for Joe. Elvis's old army buddy bounded up the stairs and turned the body over. It was stiff with rigor mortis, though Joe was able to stretch it out a bit and pound on Elvis's chest to try to get him breathing. Joe already knew the awful truth. Elvis had crawled several feet and vomited before dying, but he didn't want Ginger to see any more and sent her into the other room. Then he called for an ambulance and got Dr. Nick on the phone and mumbled something about a heart attack. With the ambulance screaming through Whitehaven, Joe called down to Vernon's office. Suddenly, the upstairs was a mass of people. Charlie was crying and begging Elvis not to die, and Vernon, still recuperating from his own heart attack only months earlier, collapsed on the floor moaning, "Don't go, son. You're going to be all right." Now Lisa Marie peered wide-eyed into the scene, and Joe yelled at Ginger, "Get her out of here, quick!" 88-year-old Minnie May consoled her, all the while wondering how Elvis could die before his own grandmother. "What happened to him?" asked Ulysses Jones, one of the emergency medical techs. Al blurted out the truth. "We think he OD'd." Dr. Nick attended him all the way to the hospital, performing CPR and screaming, "Breathe for me!" at a man who was long past hearing. At Baptist Memorial, the Harvey team attempted every heroic measure, and then, to no few tears, finally gave up. At the end, Marion Koch, who had been paged to the emergency room, wiped off the once handsome face and kissed Elvis's cheek. Dr. Nick, his skin ashen, shuffled into the private waiting room where Joe sat with Charlie, Al, Billy, and David Stanley. "He's gone," he said, his voice breaking. "He's no longer here." The men cried shamelessly and held on to each other as Dr. Nick asked Maurice Elliott, the hospital spokesman, not to make the announcement until he'd informed Vernon. He worried that the old man's heart might not be able to take the shock, and immediately left for Graceland to perform the grim duty, riding back in the same ambulance that had taken Elvis away. Joe Smith was there when the doctor walked up to Vernon and shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said, his face a mask of grief. Suddenly, as Joe remembered, the whole world was at a standstill. Ginger, too, was struck with an overwhelming sense of sadness, disbelief, and feeling as if Graceland had also died. But Elvis's fans would cut her no slack, forever branding her as the woman who had not saved him, and despising her mother, Jo, who ultimately filed and won a lawsuit against the estate to pay the mortgage on her home, as Elvis had promised. Later that afternoon, Vernon would leave the chaos inside the house and stand on the steps of Graceland to tell the world, "My son is dead." Already suspecting that Elvis would not be coming home, he had tried to prepare Lisa Marie, but the child was confused and strangely mimicked the reactions of the media. She stood there and put her hands on her hips like an adult, reports Larry Geller. She said, "I just can't believe it. Elvis Presley is dead." Yet when Sam Thompson got his sister Linda on the line, the child, standing nearby, was simply Elvis's daughter. Sam gave her the receiver. "It's Lisa," the small voice spoke into the phone. Linda cooed. "I know who it is, you goober nickel." Then came the words that she had dreaded for so long. "Linda," Lisa said, "Daddy's dead." Before he left the hospital, Joe asked Maurice Elliott for some privacy, and the public relations man led him into a conference room off the ER. There, Joe called the colonel in Portland. George Parkhill answered and handed the phone to the big man.
I have something terrible to tell you,
Joe began, his voice wavering. In the moments before the word went out on radio, television, and teletype wire, the women who knew Elvis best heard the news. In Los Angeles, Priscilla was meeting her sister Michelle for lunch on Melrose Avenue. I left the house knowing something was wrong, Priscilla would remember. The air was wrong. The sky was wrong. Something was putting me on edge. She saw Michelle's face, and her stomach tightened. A call came in from Memphis, Michelle started. This big shock went through me, Priscilla would say. Lisa was in Memphis, so she was sure something bad had happened to her. No, Michelle said. It's Elvis. They have him in the hospital. When Priscilla got home, she could hear the phone ringing from her front step. I couldn't get my key in the door fast enough. It was Joe's voice, delivering the message she never wanted to hear. Suddenly, time stopped, and then, she later said, the sun went out. Next, Joe called Shirley. He just said, Elvis is dead. I went, that's not a funny joke, Joe. Then he started to cry. I had never heard Joe cry, so I knew it was no joke. I went out in the alley behind our apartment, just crunched over crying. I scratched my nails against the wall and just followed it from the top to the bottom. Joe asked Shirley to help take care of some of the travel arrangements and to call Anne Margaret. She had opened at the Las Vegas Hilton the night before and wondered why Elvis's guitar-shaped flower arrangement hadn't arrived. He'd never missed an opening in 10 years, and the actress-singer was worried. The switchboard operator told Shirley that the Smiths had a block on their phone. Well, you need to go through it, Shirley said. This is an emergency. Roger picked up, and Shirley told him that Joe just called with the dreadful news. Roger turned to his wife and said simply, It's Shirley. Then all Shirley heard was screaming in the background. Joe then called Sheila Ryan. She didn't ask what had happened. She knew. Elvis had died of a broken heart. I turned the world off. The television, the radio. I wouldn't go to the store. I couldn't deal with it. Now it was all over the media. Joyce Bova was driving on I-95 with a friend, Carolyn Russo, while Janice was in another car with their mother. Janice heard it on the radio and pulled up beside her sister, blowing her horn and yelling for her to turn on the news. The first thing I heard was a DJ announcing, "The singer of this song is dead today." Her heart sank when Elvis's voice wafted out. I couldn't even react. I was just in shock. The family pulled over, got out of their cars, and made a circle, hugging Joyce on the shoulder as traffic whizzed by. Ann Ellington heard it in a Nashville doctor's office on the loudspeaker. I was absolutely devastated. Raquel Welch was in rehearsal for a Vegas show when somebody came running into the room and said, "Elvis is dead." And everybody went numb. It was the end of an era. Susanna Lee had just awakened from a dream in which Elvis told her goodbye. Then she got a call from CBS News, wanting comment. And down in Biloxi, June Juanico was just getting up from a nap. When I came out of my bedroom, my mother was looking at me really strangely. Finally, she said, "June." And she came over and she was holding me at arm's length, and she had tears in her eyes. She said, "I just heard on the television that Elvis Presley has died." I looked at her and said, "That can't be. That can't be." I went over to the television and just fell to my knees in front of it. All I could do was make grunting sounds. I couldn't breathe. I honestly think if my mother had not been with me, I might have died. In my heart, I always thought that Elvis and I would be together again. Somewhere down the road. Epilogue. Nearly 33 years after his death, Elvis Presley still holds sway, his musical talent shaping the seminal years of an entire genre. His songs, Love Me Tender, Viva Las Vegas, serving as touchstones for American culture, his legacy a cautionary tale of unbridled excess, combined with too little self-knowledge and too much fame. His tragedy is not simply that he died too soon, without breaking his dependence on prescription drugs and realizing the enormity of his talent in projects that fed his creative muse, but that he was forever trapped in a loop of dissatisfaction and suffering, stemming from the loss of his twin and the premature death of his mother, with whom he had been lethally enmeshed since childhood. Her passing amounted to a double death in that it forever cut his immediate tie with Jesse Garon, and brought about an acute anguish that he had never dealt with on a conscious level. When Gladys died, he wildly grieved for both his twin and his mother, and his bereavement opened a chasm of sorrow that he was never able to close. His symptoms, a preoccupation with his losses, an intense yearning for the departed, persistent thoughts about death, guilt, and unmanageable sieges of sadness, fit what is clinically known as complicated grief or prolonged grief disorder. Psychiatrists formally called it stuck grief and link it to higher incidences of substance abuse, suicide attempts, and social problems. For Elvis specifically, his debilitating trauma compounded his heightened need for human contact and stunted his ability to cope and deal emotionally with adult problems and responsibilities. His normal grief symptoms gradually faded, but in time, his prolonged grief grew worse, particularly in the wake of his divorce. Complicated grief is still being researched, but mental health professionals estimate that it affects more than 1 million people a year, or 15% of the bereaved. It is currently under consideration for addition to the DSM-5, the American Psychiatric Association's handbook, which is used in diagnosing mental disorders. Simply put, Dr. M. Catherine Shear, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, told the New York Times, "Complicated grief can wreck a person's life." Elvis would demonstrate varying degrees of prolonged grief throughout his life, but perhaps the most constant manifestation was his interaction with women, because he could not separate or individuate from his twin and then from his mother. His ability to relate intimately with others was already intricately, neurologically, psychologically, and inexorably established. No room was left for others. Even when he attempted to replicate his level of intimacy with Gladys and Jesse Garon, as he did with scores of women throughout his life, he could never find a long-lasting romantic sexual bond. And looking to one or even two concurrent women or adolescent girls as substitutes who might make him feel complete, Elvis put himself, and his female friends, in an impossible situation. Still, there were times, particularly with Anne Margaret and Linda Thompson, when he broke through his psychological chains and got close to realizing an ideal relationship. But his extreme addiction to drugs and rampant sexual conquests, grounded in the promiscuous behavior of his father and grandfather, though escalating far beyond what either of those two men could have imagined, amounted to self-sabotage of the first order, and further set him up for romantic failure and continued emotional disappointment. Yet he never seemed to learn from his mistakes, which remained unexamined as he moved on immediately to the next woman, just as he went from doctor to doctor for another supply of pills without investigating ways to quell his urges or take control of his life. Finally, his parents' directive that he was special, having survived when Jesse Garon did not, gave him license to indulge in increasingly dangerous behavior without fear of repercussion or death, and encouraged his messianic tendencies as a conduit of a higher power. In allowing him to compartmentalize and build walls, it also left him with no real boundaries as to how to treat other individuals, especially monogamous women who expected a faithful mate. and lovers who he insisted share his drug protocol. However, Elvis knew full well how to deal with the masses, for it was the unconditionally adoring fans who shored up his fragile sense of greatness and allowed him the fleeting perception of fulfilling his psychological imperative to live for two. With this once-in-a-lifetime system of support, Elvis, a once-in-a-lifetime performer, was propelled to feel as he thought he should, but only while on stage. One time in Las Vegas, reports Uber fan Robin Roseanne, it was so funny. This woman threw her bra, and Elvis put it on his head and pretended he was an airline pilot and it was his helmet. He liked that spontaneity with the fans, because he felt that if he was pleasing them and they were having fun, they were going to please him back. In this setting, on stage, mistakes were simply not in his emotional vocabulary. He could bend and twist the audience's applause to rationalize whatever he did with his life. He was their king, and both sides, the stage and the audience, realized this odd reality. There, and only there, Elvis Presley felt whole, loved, and happy. Thank you for listening to Baby Let's Play House, written by Alana Nash. Read for you by Aaron Spencer, with the introduction read by the author. Aaron Spencer is a member of SAG-AFTRA. This audiobook was produced by One Night Stand Studios. Text copyright 2010 by Alana Nash. Production copyright 2020 by Alana Nash. All rights reserved.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.